Yo, Atlas speaking, and welcome to part 6 of What If I Was Reincarnated in the DC Universe with the Avatar The Last Airbender system. Let the tale begin. Chapter 116, Aden's Perspective. Aden's P.O.V. Okay. Connor had nothing on this dude. He was relentless. Unforgiving. Feral. Strong, but most of all, in pain. A deep confusion that gave way to anger could be spotted in his eyes as Terror struggled to fight back. Terror's own moves were clinical and efficient, meant to deal with something in extreme prejudice. Meaning, he would hit to destroy when ordered to. There was no enjoyment to be found when fighting, not for him. Both individuals were broken. Each for different reasons. But as things were, I would lose my asset before I even put into good use. The Kryptonian xenomorph had by now nudged a few hidden memories about the show. And it was only because of his similarity to Connor that I remembered something online about this Kryptonian clone's full powers. My telepathy was good. Like really good now. My range had steadily increased from 70 meters the last time I checked, to a little over 100. But despite organizing my memories with the help of the Martians and my own efforts, the mind was a complicated maze of thoughts and memories. Something was likely to slip through once in a while. What else was hiding deep in the crevices of my mind? The point to that rant was that I now had an idea on who Terror was dealing with: Project Match. The first Kryptonian clone created by the Light that was a failure. That was before they came up with a way to combine human and Kryptonian D.N.A to stabilize the clone, hence leading to Connor's creation, but with a fraction of Superman's powers. Back to the fight, Terror was getting his ass handed to him. That couldn't stand. My view was suddenly overhauled as the surroundings started spinning. Terror's body flipped through the ground, digging a trail onto the floor before stopping in place. A trail of blood fell upon his eyes and he wiped it away. Okay, let's get a rundown of his powers. The transmission seemed to be a mental link established between me and Terror by the tower. It was the same way I had control over every creature in my realm, but this felt more intimate. I combed through his memories to get a better understanding of his powers while keeping my invasive actions on task as much as I could. Every mind was sacred and private. That was the first thing Manhunter had taught me. And I was of the same opinion. A second was all it took to understand what Terror had going for him. And geez, talk about overpowered. Basically, Terror had access to 7 powers, each represented by a color aura that covered his body when he was accessing a particular ability. Purple was meant for healing, orange was for flight, red showed up when making shields and force fields, yellow indicated energy projections / blasts, green to cast illusions, white for intense energy projections / basically a stun and flash grenade all in one, and lastly rainbow was for something. The scientists doing tests and research on him were yet to find out its function. Yeah, Terror was stupidly op. But time and time again, I've seen that sheer power does not always overcome skill. During the one-sided fight, a thought had occurred to me: I could get 2 assets for the price of none. Match was very powerful. A real and true Kryptonian. Just missing something. There was a problem with his DNA. But even with that, he ragdolled Terror with minimal difficulty. I firmed my resolve. There was no way I was letting the Light keep him. Plus, it was the right thing to do, granting him freedom and the chance to choose what he wanted in life. Terror's victory had now just gotten even more crucial. I used my telepathy to start guiding his actions. Not enough to take control of him fully, but a small nudge in the right direction. How to use his colors in conjunction with Tommy Terror's metagene to give just as much as he received. The tides changed as Terror expertly switched between the colors and fought off Match. And finally, I saw my chance. Match was drowned in a massive outpour of yellow energy. The power enough to hurt even me, but before he could die, under my direction, Terror opened a boom tube in the last minute and Match was sucked in. The energy wave died out, revealing a crater and no sign of Match. I sighed in relief when I noticed a lack of suspicion after looking over at Luthor, a scientist and a dude in a flying chair watching the battle from a balcony. Terror was safe. For now. The flying chair dude turned back and a boom tube appeared before him. A serious look came onto my face. He wasn't part of the light, so the only other possible identity I could think of was that he was a new god. And this time, I had the answer as to who he was. The only new god who floated on a high-tech chair was Metron. Suddenly, everything made sense. That's why the second directive from the tower had been completed so quickly. Metron probably scanned the remnants energy of the father box and found out it wasn't complete. As a seeker of knowledge, it was obvious he would try to find out why. I took another deeper mental reading of Terror's memories. Sorry. I apologized, however I couldn't take the chance. And just like that, I understood a lot. Luthor and the light were after a Phantom Zone projector. Terror didn't have any more information on that, but I could think of a few reasons why he would want something like that. It was either to send someone in, or to get someone out. Both possibilities sent a shudder through my spine. In return, the light offered the chance of studying Terror's existence to Metron, knowing fully well that he wouldn't say no. What scared me was how the light had deep connections even with new gods. Metron, using his Morbius chair, had attempted to do a deep scan and trace the connection between the essence of the father box and the other part making up the core of my world, but failed due to my realm being inaccessible and impossible to find. Fortunately, that brief surge of the old link had allowed the tower to take advantage and re-establish a connection, and then the rest was history. Keep on following Luthor's orders, however under no circumstances should you hurt an innocent. Barring that, don't let your cover get blown. I ordered Terror and cut off the transmission. Back in my body, I rubbed my forehead and sighed, something that had become a routine now. Luckily, my week of rest followed by 3 days of seclusion had gone by without a hitch. A win in my book. I teleported out of the fire plane, waving goodbye to the little dragon that was watching me from the sides, still a bit shy. The next step I took was on the rocky island housing the tower tasked with the creation of worker, support and fighter drones to protect and serve my realms. It was a really huge dimension. I still hadn't made it to the end of it. There was the option of simply teleporting there, but I wanted to keep the mystery going on for a little while longer. I had controlled the boom tube to send Match here. Why? You might ask. Simple. The tower had scanning capabilities that would allow me to understand his physiology better, and given the fact that the tower's main function had to do with production and repair, my bet was that maybe it could similarly stabilize his DNA. Match's body was hovering before the tower. A platform made of metal was holding him down while green energy rings ran a scan of his bio. The clone looked strained. The anger still clouding his eyes was there, but he seemed restrained by something. I sought to understand why and was shocked by the response. All the solar energy in his cells was being actively drawn out by the tower. Probably an improvised take on its sub-function to drain resources and energy from my realm to create the drones. Then a unique frequency that disrupted the brain signals to the limbs, making movement sluggish, was being emitted to ensure he didn't lash out violently. I went towards him and his eyes turned to stare at me with scary intensity. He wanted to attack me. To break and destroy me as appeasement to the rage and anger burning inside him. I pitied him. Pitied that his whole existence had been meant to be used as a tool. And when they found out that tool was broken, they shoved a living, breathing being to the side. To live in a pod up until his use was needed. It sickened me. I'm sorry. You are not a weapon anymore. You're now free to do what you want. I said, offering my words as consolation. Whatever good that did. God, he looked so much like Connor when we first saw him. Broken and unsure. Connor had luckily found his place in the world. In part due to the team and I being there. I would be there for Match as well. After all, I know what it felt like to not have anyone in your corner. To be unsure and afraid. His face eased up somewhat and I stepped away from him. Okay, here goes nothing. I touched the energy film covering the tower and connected with it. Scan his biology for any deformities and irregularities, then fix him in any way you can. That is your primary directive for now. The tower pulsed in acceptance and I pulled my hand away. Now, I wondered to myself, what's the next step? Chapter 117, No More Weakness. General P.O.V. The pressure that would have normally crushed a normal human's body was nothing before Connor's durability. The rest of the journey after being brought to the outskirts of Poseidonis by bioship and Gan was carried out through swimming. Connor had an improvised rebreather, fashioned specifically to work underwater. It wasn't the first time a League member had accompanied Aquaman to Atlantis before. The rebreather projected a thin film of energy that covered Connor's face and ended at the chin in a small and slim device that fit snugly upon the clone's chiseled jawline. The device had one or rather two more functions. It allowed Connor to clearly process sound waves coming through water and see better. Although that last one was a bit redundant seeing as he had enhanced eyesight. Calder gave a thumbs up to the bioship and patted Connor's shoulders while smiling. "Let us go, my friend. We shall meet them again soon." Connor gave him a nod but still took the time to look back at the bioship. "Gan," he called telepathically, his psychic touch soft and warm. "Yes, Connor?" Gan answered back. Out of everyone she was the one person Connor would miss the most. He closed his eyes and soaked in the mind touch between them. Gan projected her own feelings at him. Feelings he knew he also shared. Nothing needed to be addressed for now. "Stay safe," he finally said. "You too," she answered. He gave bioship an affectionate rub and then swam after Calder. The bioship turned back and left. Connor felt the loss of Gan's telepathic touch and clenched his fist. "It's only for a month. Just until I get it. That feeling of strength. That power. It's my right." He nodded to himself and increased his swimming speed to catch up with Calder. He finally made it and they both swam in silence as Connor looked on in awe at the new environment. The Cadmus memories he had retained glossed over Atlantis, not really offering much apart from its structure. With Poseidonis being the capital and the other ocean states being subservient to the High King, Anaxagoras. It went into detail about the tumultuous political divide and unrest, Poseidonis being more economically developed and generally more desirable to live in than the rest of the cities. But, what that information had failed to mention was just how beautiful the underwater city was. Connor wasn't one to overly appreciate art, but he felt like he was watching the most beautiful painting he had ever seen in his short life. "Beautiful," he commented, just as they made it to the southern entrance of the city. Two guards swam up to meet them, holding lances that gleamed with power. "Halt," one of them said. "Wait. Caldurum, is that really you?" the other guard asked, holding the shoulder of the first one. The look in both their eyes changed when Calder nodded with a smile. "Greetings. I hope you are both well." The guards relaxed their stances. "We are. I am sorry we did not recognize you right away." "No matter." He waved the apology away before pointing at Connor. "This is a friend of mine. Connor Kent." "It's fine, Caldurum, your friend is welcome in Poseidonis," the guard said after sharing a brief look with each other. "Thank you. Have a lovely day." Connor followed Calder through the gate while studying the other teen in curiosity. Atlanteans left and right looked at them in interest, and Calder more often than not had to answer greetings as they made their way to the palace. "Seems like someone's famous around here." Connor started the conversation. Calder sighed in mild exasperation. "Yes. Since apprenticing under my king as Aqualad, my prominence has risen up. Come, let us not keep the royal family waiting," Calder said and shot off, leaving Bubbles behind his feet. Connor narrowed his eyes. Clearly the other teen did not want to talk about that particular subject. Connor could understand. He remembered the last conversation that had happened with Superman after his decision to come to Atlantis. His genetic father had been adamant to understand why he had elected to do so. Connor had wanted to tell him everything. About the D.N. patches, about Luthor. Instead, after finding out that the report the team had given had been missing a crucial detail, that is, the the way he had accessed the rest of his Kryptonian heritage's powers, Connor had kept quiet. He understood that Calder was the one responsible. The other team must have decided that this was a team thing and they would deal with it amongst themselves. Still, the guilt had been eating away at him. Which is why he left behind a letter for Superman along with the rest of the D.N. Apaches, requesting that he keep it under wraps so as to not get the team in trouble for covering for him. They arrived at the palace and Calder's whole demeanor changed. He stood up straighter and his aura changed to that of a seasoned warrior. Calder slowed down and waited until Connor pulled up beside him. "Before we go in, I need to know why you insisted on coming, my friend." Connor had known the question would come, sooner or later. He looked at his hands and briefly remembered that fight with Aden. Connor had had enough of losing. Enough of being too weak to help his friends face the truly powerful. He didn't want to feel weak again. He looked Calder straight in the eyes and said in the clearest tone he could, "Strength. My own, so I don't have to go behind my teammates' back to use borrowed power. So that next time, we will not get blindsided without pushing back with everything I have." Calder blinked his eyes, understanding where Connor was coming from. "Thank you for your honesty, Connell." He used his real name to address him. "I am not sure you will find what you seek, but I can promise you, I feel the same way and will help you in every way I can. No more weakness." He held out his hand and Connor clasped it with a nod. "No more weakness," the Kryptonian xenomorph clone said with as much conviction as he could. A few hours later, the Watchtower. "Don't mind the group setting. I thought it prudent to talk to you all at the same time. Now, who wants to go first?" Black Canary asked the 4 teens sitting in front of her. Connor and Calder had left for Atlantis a couple of hours ago and Bio's ship had just made it back after taking them there. After Mgan had arrived, Canary had called them in for one final meeting before their 1-month suspension begun. None of them looked happy. "I don't get it. Suddenly we're so inept that you had to suspend us for 1 month?" Kid Flash shouted while getting up. "The team wasn't even part of the Justice League when we formed it. Maybe Red Arrow was right. Maybe the League will never allow us to be independent," he said to the others. Artemis looked away and shrunk on herself. The team was something special to her. Suddenly she had new friends who understood what it was like trying to balance 2 lives. And now that was going away. Wally said all he wanted and sank back to his seat in a huff. Black Canary looked around at the other 3. "Who wants to go next? This is a safe place. You can say anything you want. Anything troubling you." She told them, her gaze lingering on Mgan for a few more seconds than the rest. "Mgan?" Canary projected her thoughts out to the Martian girl in concern. "Oh." She looked up startled. "Sorry, I spaced out for a second," she said after seeing everybody stare at her. Black Canary nodded in understanding. "It's fine, Mgan. I just wanted to ask you how you're feeling. You look more distracted than usual." The Martian girl clasped her hands on her lap and struggled to find the words. "Just missing Connor is all," she replied and looked away. "Artemis, do you have anything to add?" Canary called out to the resident archer out of nowhere. "Me?" Artemis shook her head. "I'm good. The League did what they thought was appropriate." Wally snorted at that and Artemis shot him a dead look. The speedster withered under everyone's look, not just hers, and looked away while muttering sorry. "Mh." Canary hummed. "I see. You said the League did what they thought was appropriate. Can you elaborate on that?" Artemis sighed. She didn't like being put on the spot like that. However, she was never one to not speak her mind. Suspending us is the wrong move. The Justice League is already too understaffed even without taking us out of the fight. That move will strain the already strained resources further. And your reasons for doing so don't add or hold up. We can even operate from a coal factory. Not having a base is not sufficient reason for you to ruin what we have been building." She finished her rant and pulled her legs closer to E-body on the large seat. Do the rest of you feel the same? She asked the others. Wally and Gan seemed to agree. Wally looking at Artemis in a new light after her answer. Everything she had said resonated with him. Robin? Black Canary asked their final teammate who up until then had been silent. Too silent. Instead of answering her, Robin directed his gaze to his teammates. Did Calder or Connor feel the same? He questioned them. Particularly looking at Artemis. "'Cause it seems to me like they couldn't wait to get out of here once the team suspension got extended to a full month." Black Canary narrowed his eyes at Robin. "Calder and Connor, your teammates, both had their reasons," she said in a slightly hard tone. Robin sighed. "Sorry. I didn't mean it that way. Look, I even get why they chose to do so. After seeing just how powerful Aden had gotten during our last mission, we all felt it. Weakness. Like we were being left so far back the next time we meet him out in the battlefield, he'll walk all over us." The same rang even more true for Calder as the leader in Connor because of his rivalry with Aden. But, we all felt the pressure. He paused to collect himself. We all know Calder went back to Atlantis to complete his magic studies or failing that at least grow stronger, and I think that is the same for Connor as well. He must have thought that something Atlantis has could stand in for those patches he used on the latest mission to access his full Kryptonian abilities. Black Canary stilled in place, her hand pausing from the notes she had been taking. "Dude!" Wally shouted out at him. Even Gan and Artemis stared at Robin in surprise at the casual bomb drop. Boy Wonder, on the other hand, waved off their concerns. "She is bound by client confidentiality. She won't tell anyone." Black Canary narrowed her eyes. "Besides, if I know Connor, he's already talked to Superman about it." "Maybe." Black Canary cleared her throat and decided to consult with the Man of Steel later. "Moving on, what were you saying?" She prompted Robin to continue. "The point is, I am conflicted. Batman has always taught me to trust in my guts, skills, and teammates. To always be prepared. To hit from the shadows and avoid a protracted fight. So the blatant directness Connor and Calder are using to get more powerful so as to punch harder is not something you can easily reconcile with." Canary concluded for him. "I mean, what if Connor gets what he wants and becomes even more power-hungry? Where does he stop? We all know what those things did to him. They made him more violent. What if he changes? What if he leaves us behind, like Aden did?" Silence reigned. All of the teens had their heads turned to the ground. Black Canary took a short moment to organize her thoughts before speaking. "Then don't let it happen." They looked up at her in shock. "What do you mean?" "It's not a crime to better yourself. Your skills. Just because you can't hit harder doesn't mean you can't incapacitate someone. Use your creativity. This month should be a sort of rebirth for all of you. A turning point. Maybe even a new starting point. Gan, better your shape-shifting abilities and telekinesis. Artemis, diversify your arrows in close-quarter combat. Kid Flash, learn how to use your speed better to fight. You can form tornadoes. Get more creative. You might not be faster than the Flash, but don't copy his fighting style. Create your own with what you have. And Robin, train your body to get limber, more agile. Then get your skills to master level and beyond. To augment your strength, I suggest a weapon sturdy enough for hitting harder not to matter. I even have a few suggestions. All I am saying is, Calder and Connor will make the best of this month. Don't let yourselves waste it." Later, Black Canary and Captain Atom came out of the Zeta tube from within an abandoned telephone booth. "You're late," Batman told them. He was standing in an alleyway littered with trash. "Sorry, the talk went on longer than I anticipated. We're here now." She then took a deep breath and nodded to Captain Atom, who returned the gesture. With that, the decision had been made. "They're ready," Black Canary told Batman. The Dark Knight was silent for a few seconds before he stepped to the side and pointed at a man leaning on a dumpster. "This is Richard Dragon," Black Canary gasped. "A friend. A rival and one of the best martial artists in the world. He will train them to the best of his capabilities. He will break them and reforge them anew." Chapter 118, The Next Threats. General P.O.V. The mystical opposition we can expect is light. That is, however, dependent on him not interfering. But our Lord has ensured that will not to be a problem. That leaves us with few that can stand against our might, chief of whom being the lords of order and chaos. Fortunately, they have been embroiled in a struggle. A fight that has been going on for eons, with no clear winner. Balance has been and will be their main contention, which finally leaves only the Earth's mystical practitioners to come for us. Jason Blood being the most likely among them. Fortunately, our new base is far from their reach. By the time they marshal up a force to stop the plan, it will be too late. A whisper rang out across the castle. A blonde girl with blue eyes nodded, dressed in a red dress and a blue cloak above it. She was hauntingly beautiful. That beauty was ruined by the cold look in her eyes. Her face was impassive and blank, showing no emotion. Just like he expected her to be. A heartless bitch. She had been trained since young to never question him. Her adopted father. He had saved her after all. So she gave him the gratitude and reverence he wanted, and he had taught her everything he knew of the arcane. Thinking he had her manipulated. Both had a goal. She sought the freedom of someone dear to her, and he just wanted power. Too much power. And now, after 10 long years, Alyssa was finally close. However, the task she needed to carry out left her confused. She wondered, what was the point of turning the Earth, or now, the solar system, into a realm of cold and ice? What was the endgame here? Truly? There had to be an angle, right? Maybe she couldn't see it, but one thing she knew was that her adopted father was cunning. You had to be if you aimed to steal the realm and power of a Hell Lord. He thought she had no idea on his true motives, but his intentions were clear to her. The main magic spell component was to supplant the rule of Belial and install a new Hell Lord in his place. That new Hell Lord would be Alistair. That's all she knew. But really, none of that mattered as long as she saved John. John, who had sacrificed himself and taken her place, John who had been suffering for a decade in hell. Alyssa continued on her way, taking the stairs into the unrestricted portion of the castle. Her mage tower. She pushed the door open with a burst of telekinesis, using a chain ending with an inverted cross to channel her magic. There, the entrance portal to their new base of operations was located. As was the painting, showing the bald head of one Alistair Crowley. Occultist, magician, and Alyssa's master/adopted father. The painting grew animated, a slow smile spreading across its face as he stared at the young girl. Providence smiles upon those unafraid to seek power, those unafraid to shatter the status quo, my daughter. And of those, you, Alyssa Constantine, are worthy of all that and much more. March forward and claim what is rightfully yours, in service of our Lord Belial and I, your father. Remember what you stand to gain. Power to never be weak again. The whisper concluded. The girl, who couldn't have been more than 18 years, gave a curt nod. As you command, father. He was wrong, she wasn't doing this for power. She was doing this to save someone. He thought of that as a mere side goal. Having fed him that notion through the years so that when the time came, Alistair would not think to use John as her weak point. She clenched her hands. For you, Johnny. I will save you. She touched a locket hanging off her neck and her eyes gained a determined light. She wouldn't keep this farce up for long. As soon as Belial honored his promise and released her brother, Alyssa was calling down hellfire on this accursed castle and Alistair Crowley himself. Elsewhere, Luthor applied pressure and smashed the glass in his hands. Broken shards of glass fell to the floor and Luthor held out his arm to the side. Like a ghost, Mercy Graves, his personal assistant and bodyguard, appeared with a towel and a clean bandage. Looking closely at Luthor's palm, one could see it was bleeding. They were both still at the Cadmus facility, having just ran tests on the Phantom Zone projector they'd gotten from Metron. Besides them, there were two more individuals in the lab. One, like a silent watchman, ever cautious and observant, was Terror. He made sure to use the link he had with the elemental dimension to create a log with information that he deemed important for Aden. Unfortunately, the Phantom Zone projector did not fall in that category. The next person in the room with them was the head scientist of this particular branch of Cadmus. The same one tasked with monitoring the progress of Terror and Project Match. Though the latter, Project Match, had been scratched off the books, valuable info taken and everything else dumped. Therein lied the problem. "What is the next step, sir?" the scientist asked, adjusting the frame of his glasses while staring questioningly at Luthor. I should have known this would happen. The character profile on Metron was accurate, but what it failed to mention was just how cunning and self-serving he could be. Who knew he would place a genetic lock on the Phantom Zone projector so that only a Kryptonian could use it? As it stands, we do not have a Kryptonian on hand after Terror destroyed Match. The D.N. samples we had have all been used for Project Godblood, and our only chance of doing this anonymously is 2,000 fucking feet deep in the ocean. Lex took in a deep breath and closed his eyes. He adjusted his tie and exhaled, calming his nerves as his brilliant mind worked overtime to come up with a solution. A smile lit up his face. There is one more Kryptonian running around unchecked, however. The scientist widened his eyes. You mean Superman? He asked, nervousness dripping from his tone. But sir, what about the Justice League? They will hit us back with their full power should we go after Big Blue. I thought we decided to lay low until Project Rebirth commenced. Lex shook his head, getting another glass and pouring a drink in it. Who said anything about us going after him? If what I'm thinking of works, we not only get Charney and D.N.A for study and Project Godblood, but we also get Superman. All the while keeping our hands clean. Well, relatively anyway. I reckon things will get bloody before they settle down. Lobo is not known for subtlety after all. He chuckled. Metron thought he was fucking us over. Fucking me over, but I bet he didn't see this coming. Elsewhere, edge of the sector. Ambassador, I am getting strange energy readings from the dwarf planet on the outskirts of the target star system. A reach assistant informed the ambassador, who immediately pulled up the data on the huge screen. Seems like Theta-class energy signatures. Otherwise commonly known as. The scientist standing next to the ambassador started. Magic. The ambassador concluded. This star system keeps on getting more and more interesting. Have there been signs of intelligent or any life really on this planet? His question was directed towards scientists, who shook her head, parsing through all the information their discrete probes had acquired of each of the planets in the solar system. None. Send me down there with a few soldiers and I will come back with answers. The Scarab, enforcer in this mission, requested of the ambassador only to get denied. That will not be needed. We will maintain our position. Observing only. We need to know more before going in. These aliens are not like the rest. They're different, and I will not take unnecessary risks and jump in before we are prepared. As you command. Fine. The scientist and the Scarab both answered, respectively. Elsewhere, Las Vegas. The tides are changing. Faster than expected. Faster than you anticipated, ain't that right, Maze? A gorgeous woman with an hourglass figure told the Lilim perched on the window frame. Behind the black-clad sexy demoness, the Las Vegas nightlife was in full swing. Maze didn't answer for a few seconds. She felt conflicted. Out of everyone, her sister had taken after their mother the most. She was ambitious, conniving, deadly, and oh so very sensuous. She played with men, seduced them, sucked them for all they were worth, and then left them out to dry. She enjoyed their pain, being a classic sadist. All things Maze enjoyed. They would have gotten along if she wasn't such a great a bitch. But blood is blood, and like her or not, Calliope was her sister. She also hesitated to send Aden after her. Who knew what would happen to the boy after being exposed to a lust demon? Then again, Aden was willful to a degree she wondered how he still hadn't received a Green Lantern ring. He could probably handle Calliope's seduction, right? Get out while you still can, sister. If you die, it's over. Lucifer is not around to allow passage to hell for your true form. You lot fucking conspired to get rid of him. Maze said her piece. Calliope turned to reply but was met with nothing. Maze had disappeared. Aiden's P.O.V. Is it just me or did the world get a little bit darker? I wondered, shivering in uneasiness. It felt like things were about to go very wrong in the coming weeks leading to my birthday. Just for the course for me, really. The only thing I had control over was my own actions. And I elected to keep on getting stronger. Which is why I was going to use my training points to purchase my first sparring partner. I had thought of it hard and long. My initial choices were Iroh, Zuko, Azula, and Sozin. All of them more than firebending masters in their own right. But I had dragons in my dimension. The original firebenders. So most on that roster were straight up useless. I was definitely sparring with Iroh. He might be a copy, but if I wanted to be better at firebending, there was literally nobody else I needed to get me there. But I now had access to lightning. And it was better in every way when compared to traditional flames. Again, having Iroh, a Grandmaster Firebender who had mastered lightning bending, would be priceless, but what if I went in a different direction? During chorus time, lightning bending was more practiced. It wasn't that common by any means, but it was definitely spread out to the masses. And given human ingenuity, the bending had no doubt been added upon and made more efficient. So what if I bought Mako instead of Azula or Zuko like I'd been thinking? Chapter 119, Sparring with Mako. Aiden's P.O.V. After deciding on Mako and Iroh, I didn't hesitate to purchase the first one from the database. I scrolled through and winced upon finding Mako being sold at 100 training points and Iroh at a whooping 200 training points. He was the most expensive one in the database by far. Thankfully, upon reaching master level in firebending, I could access the next tier up, which was Grandmaster, ergo, Iroh was up for grabs. I took a deep breath and calmed myself down. There wasn't a need to get too excited and jump the gun. Mako was up first, a veritable lightning genius to get me acclimated to using lightning along with my fighting style, seamlessly blending the two together, and then, Iroh, a Grandmaster to test myself on all facets of my firebending and maybe even more. After all, Iroh had been a general. He probably knew way more about fighting than me. He seemed like the type to cover all his bases. I stood up at the highest peak of a mountain in the fire plane. This one was even bigger than the previous one during my seclusion. The one that had been reduced to debris and charred stones by the lightning showers. That incident reminded me of the common tribulation in cultivation novels. Now that I think about it, it did seem as if I was cultivating. I pressed on the purchase tab and watched as 100 training points were deducted from my balance. I was now left with 285. Damn. A small burst of energy and Mako appeared beneath the mountain, looking up at me. Like a mortal offering a god a challenge. Well, let's oblige him. I took a step into the empty air and started falling off the peak. Halfway there I called upon my inner fire, and like a flick on a switch the fire grew colder, more precise, methodical, and cutting. Sparks of blue lightning clad my form as I landed with an impact on the ground. The ground cratered under me, and the immediate section of the ground near my feet caved in slightly. I straightened up and rose. Mako remained fearless. He fell into a stance and spread out his legs to a steady position. I took calm steps towards him, closing the distance between us to only 20 meters apart. I read his form, falling into a classic firebending position as well. He seemed to be in his 20s, telling me I was dealing with Mako at his peak. I couldn't half-ass this. A small breeze blew between us and the fight started. Mako's feet swept out as he flipped, sending a scythe of fire towards me from his leg. I calmly stepped to the side and watched it pass by me. He followed up the scythe with quick and successive punches through the air, shooting out balls of flames that I unraveled, ducked under and swept to the side with flame energy covering my hand. I jumped up to escape a flame arc aimed for my legs and flipped while in the air. Flame shot out of my feet towards his position as I speared down to the ground. He rolled away while I slammed down and melted the earth in one burst due to the hot flames. I felt a stirring through my energy sense, and the jet of flames under my feet suddenly pushed me upwards again. My training pants turned to ash from the shins to ankles. I looked down and saw blue streaks of electric energy bombard that position. Mako's outstretched fingers were slightly smoking. His eyes followed my body whilst in the air, a look of determination coming across his face. I scrunched up my eyebrows as another lightning bolt cut through the space towards me. I felt it through the air with my energy sense allowing me to spin away with my jet flames. However, I knew I couldn't evade them for long. This form of flying was not as flexible as with airbending. It was fast, but not that great at sudden direction changes. So it's only fitting I switched to lightning like my opponent had. The flame under my feet grew erratic and the color as well as aesthetic changed. My whole body felt energized and a screech cut through the air. Mako's assault grew more and more violent as he attacked. The whole area filled with energy blasts of the electric nature. I did my best to stay ahead of him, blitzing away just before any of his attacks could land. Learning how to react. Each second used to dodge or evade helping my understanding of how I could utilize this force of nature with my energy sense to dominate the field. However, something was bound to change. After dodging for so long, I started putting my efforts into the next reasonable move. Redirecting his lightning. One of the streaks hit me on the chest and I grabbed it with my energy control, wincing slightly as I was a little late and ended up getting shocked slightly. The Black Sabbath t-shirt I had on was scorched to a blackened mess, revealing my chest to the world. My fingers moved in a precise movement and I heaved, gathering his power and dispersing it towards the sky. The streaks of lightning were uncontrolled and uneven. Seems like I had my work cut out for me when redirecting the energy. Luckily, I would adjust and adapt to using this new skill as if I'd been grinding for years. Which was the point of Spark of Enlightenment, but I digress. Mako grew frustrated and his fingers began dancing in the air as he built up a charge stronger than before. Meanwhile, I leaned to the right and shot off, leading the air screaming behind me while I skated in above and around the master lightning bender. My speed was nearing 300 miles per hour as I pushed myself to move even faster. A circle of pure energy left in my wake surrounded Mako in a ring from the sky. I had decided to go on the offense in an unexpected move that would test how good I was at control. Each passing second that circle grew smaller and smaller, squeezing him in. My body escaped the ring. The whole energy structure sustainable through my will alone. Mako's next attack was stronger than before. He held up his fingers to the sky and screamed as a blast of lightning escaped his hands towards me. I looked on and decided not to dodge. Unfortunately for him, the attack did not even make it past the ring of lightning above him. The energy was sucked in and added to the whole thing, increasing the ring's size and power. AM energy field appeared from the ring and covered the whole area beneath it into a dome. Here goes nothing. Try to keep the blast radius to 10 meters and no more, I told myself, holding my hands up. The last thing Mako saw was a focused look on my face before I snapped my finger and destroyed anything inside that dome. The lightning streaks left jagged and burnt trails around a soot-filled crater that had nothing alive standing on it. Despite my victory, I didn't feel that happy. Mako was barely a challenge. And although I had the control down, there was the issue of how much power I put into any attack. Lightning was dangerous. I couldn't half-ass it because it was fast and deadly. I needed to know I could attack an opponent out there in the real world without risking civilian lives or property through wild attacks. Any of those streaks of electric energy could kill someone. I stepped down to the ground and immediately took a meditative pose. It was easy to fall into my unique breathing pattern, absent-mindedly using my inner flame for body refining. The fire ran its course through my body, warm and reassuring. It cleansed both it and my mind, helping me to self-reflect on everything that had happened. I was clearly already above Mako in lightning and firebending. I reckon I could even take 2 of him on. None of his attacks could land without me reading their trajectory, and I was faster, stronger, more durable, and way more powerful than him. I needed a real challenge to test the upper limits of what I could do, which meant it was time to purchase the big guns. Iroh was a beast. My palm was shaking in anticipation at what I could learn from him. A general in the army, a member of the White Lotus made up of some truly scary as fuck people like Piandao and Bumi, and not to mention he was also a prince of the Fire Nation, someone who had grown up in war. This is either going to end up really badly and I get my ass kicked, or, actually I don't see how else it could go down. I was normally super confident, but Iroh wasn't your run-of-the-mill bender. The only advantages I had over him were 2 things: my stronger physique and equity. That's it. I scrolled down the database tab and came upon the purchase option. I clicked on it and the whole screen shuddered for a split second, making me frown. What was happening? A new test box appeared before my vision. Alert! You cannot purchase a spiritual entity. A request has been put forward for his assistance, but ultimately, the decision to appear falls on him. A bridge between worlds has been established should he choose to heed your call. Come again, say what? If I can't purchase him, why the fuck is there an option to do so on the database? I blinked my eyes in surprise. That is not where my focus should be. Iroh is a spirit? What is going on? I tapped the text box, minimizing it and enlarging it once more in confusion. Did I finally break the system? Or have I gone insane? I wondered to myself. Neither, I would hope. Especially the last part. I would love to share a cup of tea and have a nice conversation with my host after all. An old, smooth and dignified voice said from my side. I hadn't even felt him appear. Then again, he had answered my call, which meant in a way I'd given him permission to arrive in my realm. I turned, dismissing the text box, and observed him. A small tea brewing table set in an Asian theme, if the china cups were anything to go by, was set before an old man, with a heavy-set yet short build and a glorious beard that framed his chin perfectly and fell to his chest. His eyes held a glint of mirth while his lips were set in a small smile. Robes of Earth Kingdom make were worn over his body, and he sat on his feet staring at me curiously. Well, I'll be damned, it actually is Iroh. Chapter 120, Lessons from Uncle Iroh Part 1. Aiden's P.O.V. I gently placed my palms on the teacup sitting on the table and cleared my throat. I have. Iroh's hand came up to stop me. I know you have questions, he said, eyes closed while breathing in the steam wafting off the teacup in his hands. He sighed out in contentment. This part you do not interrupt. This is the part you enjoy the serenity. I scrunched up my eyebrows and picked up the cup, imitating him and breathing in the steam. Instantly, my whole mind grew clearer and I felt at peace. I blinked my eyes open and frowned. The cup was empty. I remember it being 3/4 full of a green liquid, warm to the touch and aromatic. I looked up, following a slight chuckle from Iroh. You look confused. Brings out fond memories with my nephew. I placed the cup firmly down, taking his statement as the cue to speak. How are you doing it? I asked him, motioning to the tea table between us, holding up 2 cups and 1 kettle. Iroh ignored me in favor of taking a sip from his seemingly never-ending tea. You will have to be more precise. How was the tea? It was calming. At least the aroma was. I never took a sip, yet it's empty. I blinked, and when my eyes opened the tea was gone. Iroh hummed. That is troubling. Are you sure? I looked at him in confusion. Sure about what? The cup is EMP, tie. I looked down and stiffened. The aforementioned utensil was full. The color of the tea perfect and even. Steam rose from it into the air. How? I lifted it up and studied it. Was it a trick of the mind? I glanced at Iroh, who still saw fit to ignore me, and took a ginger sip. Bitter taste filled my mouth, yet an overpowering sensation of freedom gripped my body. Like the combination of a shower, massage, sleep, and weed intoxication. I blacked out for the second time. When I came to, the cup was similarly empty. My bones felt stiff, as if I hadn't stretched my body in hours. Something was fucking with my perception. I accessed my telepathy to get rid of any mind control or such, but came up empty. That meant my spirit. I brought a hand to my chest and felt the comfort of my heartbeat. How are you affecting it? A glint of interest finally appeared on Iroh's face. So you are smart. I'm glad to see you're asking the right questions. He took another slow sip of his tea. Unfortunately, you are wrong. I am not affecting your spirit in any way. The unique spiritual essence of the tea, on the other hand. He trailed off with another laugh. Is a different matter. You sat there gazing at the sky for 3 hours. It was entertaining. He finished with a belly laugh. I frowned down at the cup. So I was basically getting high and you sat there and didn't stop me. In fact, you refilled the cup twice for me to drink again. I'd scared. I never told you to pick up the cup. You just assumed I was offering you tea. Bullsh. Wait, he was right. After spotting him, I basically walked over, propped my ass down, and picked up the steaming cup of tea before me. Then why would you place it so conveniently in front of me? I asked him, poking holes in his answer. He looked at me and raised an eyebrow, his lips turned up in a knowing smile. The cup was never meant for me, was it? I sighed. Correct. I was having tea with a good friend when I received your rather unexpected invitation. I had no way of knowing the tea set would follow me here. I felt like groaning. Let me guess, that is lesson number 1, never jump to conclusions, assume or presume without having all the details. I rolled my eyes with a smile, admitting that he caught me off guard. Unexpectedly, he shook his head. No, the lesson is, always ask for permission first. I blinked before slapping my palm on my forehead. I did it again, jumped to conclusions. Another laugh from the wizened general told me I was correct. I couldn't help it, his laugh was infectious. I found myself chuckling at my own stupidity. I don't know if it was the tea or just the general welcoming aura Iroh exuded, but I felt relaxed. At ease, my body not coiled up in tension, ready for another fight. My name is Aden Strong. I introduced myself, remembering that I actually hadn't. Neither of us had, though I obviously knew him. Welcome to my world. I concluded, motioning around us. Thank you, Aden. You seem to know of me. Your demeanor says it all. I feel like it would be remiss if I did not introduce myself, however. You can call me Iroh, he said with a smile. I nodded back at him and we settled into a comfortable silence. The cup of tea refilled once again, but I did not try to bring it close to my mouth. My lesson had been learned. Whatever was in it was currently too strong for me. Iroh placed his own cup gently down and nodded at me in approval. Understanding your limits, knowing what you're capable of and not, helps you grow. I found myself agreeing. It was hard to accept sometimes that you've hit the peak of what you can handle, but it was in a sense comforting to know that you could still get better. Still do better. I sensed the avatar's unique chi composition inside you. Intriguing. Never in my years have I encountered this. What is troubling is your spirit itself. He started, his tone taking on a serious note. My heart began beating a little bit faster. Nothing ever good, in all the fictional worlds I know, comes from the implications of what Iroh was saying. My spirit was troubling? That is the core of all I am. That is my soul. I swallowed. What are you talking about? He held up the cup and tapped it. The ringing sound it produced spread out through the surroundings, and I found myself in an ethereal space filled with blue energy. The blue gave birth to a myriad of more colors, blending into a kaleidoscope that preceded a tale. Iroha's presence seemed to dim before disappearing. The only thing left behind was his voice. This tea provides the bare nourishing to a regular spirit and mild relaxation to an avatar. It is not meant to intoxicate you, nor should it overwhelm your spirit. Yet it does. To put things into perspective, you need to understand something. A new avatar is born when the current one dies. I listened, nodding at his explanation, already knowing all of that. Part of the blue energy mist coalesced into a familiar figure. 1. The first avatar. The process of reincarnation effectively gives the old soul a new body to live in before reincarnating again after their longevity comes to an end. One was replaced by another unfamiliar avatar, one who gave way to dozens more than hundreds before familiar figures started to appear. I saw Kyoshi give way to Roku, who gave way to Aang, who was reborn as Korra before Korra turned into a dark-skinned boy. The strength of one's soul is based on the experiences they have gone through. A being like the Avatar, hence, is exceptionally powerful. The energy showing the figure of the dark-skinned boy changed to a scene of impending sand, earth, metal, fire, lightning, water, ice, steam, and air. His body wound down from the bending stances, and he sat cross-legged. His hands bumped into one another, ending in fists with his eyes closed. Their spirit have gone through multiple cycles and rebirths that at the end of it all, they are able to exist as the node of a delicate balance between the mortal world and the spirit world, belonging to neither but both. The boy's eyes opened. One of them shone an opaque white, similar to my own whenever I was in the avatar state, while the other was blank. Nothing inside but a hole of black with the exception of pinpricks of light, like stars shining in the open space. A film of energy split his world into two, each section retaining a part of him. The left side was colored white with his clothes glowing and flapping in the wind, while the right side was colored blue. I blinked my eyes and found myself back on my fire plane. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Just to be sure, I looked down at the cup of tea and found it to be full and safely out of my reach, which meant all that was a vision of Iroha's own doing. He could affect my spiritual perception, make me see what I wanted to see, befuddle my mind with illusions. I looked down at the skin of my palm and understood what he meant by saying troubling. My spirit, it's weak. Isn't it? Too weak for an avatar. I came to the conclusion with a bitter laugh. A conclusion he had guided me towards. Studying his face did not reveal what I hoped. It did not show me I was wrong, that I was jumping to conclusions again. What I saw was the confirmation I needed. The process that turned you into the master of all the elements neglected to similarly uplift that part of you. It was artificial and has placed great strain on your soul. It's frankly a wonder that you still hold rational thought. Bending is melding your energy with the energy of the world, and if your spirit is weak or bendable, then you will be corrupted by that which you seek to influence with your will. The bombshell dropped. Chapter 121, Lessons from Uncle Iroh Part 2. Aden's P.O.V. I sat there, clenching and unclenching my fingers. Iroha's words echoed through my mind endlessly. They made a lot of sense, and truthfully, I could now see the signs of the strain on my soul he talked about. All my actions had been carried out with the confidence that I was doing the right thing. The right thing to both survive and save this world. But what was me talking, and what was my negativity? My cynicism? My fear? My arrogance? I still believed I was on the right track, but I wasn't sure I was on the right vehicle, in a manner of speaking. There were instances where I'd acted out of character, needlessly antagonistic, which if you look at the situation was justified and not entirely my fault. Yet, I was a kid who up until 3 months ago, my biggest worry was finishing high school. I hadn't ever brutally attacked anyone. Violence had never been my thing. And my thoughts had never been so cynical about the world. Yet, 3 months later, I was on the Justice League's watch list and enemies with the few friends I had made. I brought a hand on my face and ran it down. Where had it all gone wrong? Truly, I had no idea. No, that was a lie. I knew it. I had just shoved that memory far back into the recess of my mind to completely get rid of any of my guilt. It was after the Dr. Fate mission, when I had lashed out at Connor. Justifiably, of course, but I should have understood that he had only been a few weeks old. You don't get into a shouting match with someone who still didn't completely understand social cues or basic manners and personal boundaries. Granted, I had had problems even before that with Red Arrow and Kid Flash, but for God's sakes, I knew their characters beforehand. Maybe everything would still have gone down the way it did even without Iroha's new revelation about my spirit being under a lot of strain, but it sure as well wouldn't have been so bumpy. However, that was all in the past, and even offered the chance to change it, I wouldn't. The thing is, despite my now deeper understanding of how the Avatar's power affected me, I had made peace with all of it. I had let go of all the negative feelings and guilt. I was a product of my past choices, and I was a fucking badass who didn't let anyone walk over him. This new information only strengthened my resolve. Every obstacle that had appeared my way had been similarly blasted apart before me. Nothing was going to stand between me and my will. And so I asked, how can I change that? How can I strengthen my spirit? Instead of answering, Iroh took his time to finish the tea in his hands. This time, the cup stayed empty, and then he got up. The robe he was wearing fell away. My eyes widened. The old man was ripped as fuck. Those arms were toned and looked like they could break a man in half. He raised his leg and stomped it on the ground with a grunt. My energy sense screamed out at me as the earth below us cracked apart. Flames licked out of the fissures, burning red and oh so very hot. I only had the time to shield my face from the explosion that followed before I felt myself form a groove with my body through the ground. I opened my eyes and dizzily stood up. My head was ringing and my forearms slightly scorched from Iroha's unexpected move. I stood up warily. What the hell? I hissed, falling into a ready stance in case that move wasn't a one-time thing. You called me to fight, did you not? To test yourself against the might of a true firebender. I am merely obliging you the courtesy, he said, walking forward slowly. His presence doubled in power, then tripled in my senses. The air immediate his surroundings rippling in a mirage of power. The change had happened so fast. 1 minute he was a nice old man, albeit cryptic, then the next this monster of a bender who registered in my senses as fucking op. Still. I shook my head. I don't want to fight you. I still have a lot more questions that I need answers to. Besides, I spread out my hands and the world shook as I exerted appease my full influence on the fire plane, showing him the futility of his actions. You cannot beat me while I am here. I am the master of this place. The one and true deity. The rumbling stopped and my hands fell. So how about we forget that you just tried to make barbecue out of me and continue with our talk? Iroh looked to be in thought before he started laughing. I do not disagree. You have the advantage here. However, do not be too quick to count me out, he told me with a fiery glint in his eyes. A pulsation of energy escaped his body, spreading out through the surroundings. An energy I could not clearly sense. It hit my body and immediately, I felt something resonate from deep within me. Pressure. Heaviness. Too much. Too heavy. I heaved, my mouth opening up but no words coming out. I fell down to my knees as Iroha's steps registered in my senses. You have the home advantage, I have the spirit advantage. He was suppressing my soul. How in the hell was he doing this? This went further than just being able to affect my perception. It felt like I was carrying a huge load on every part of my body. Every second, the heavy toll increased, sending me to meet the ground quicker. Mage? I heard him hum in confusion. Your spirit seems to be adapting to the suppression. That completely threw me out of the loop. It was? Of course. Adaptive physiology. But how was the perk doing this? Did it extend its influence past the body and my mental aspect? If so, then I tried to marshal up my will and push back against Iroha's spiritual aura. A splitting headache started to hammer through my head as I pushed myself up. Incredible. For the first time, I heard shock and surprise from the old general. I ignored him. I ignored everything. Even the power I had in my realm. The power to banish him away or attack him using the fire plane itself. I ignored all that in favor of what I was combating. The obstacle standing in my way. Like the rest, it would break apart. The pressure doubled. A crater formed under me as Iroha's spiritual power slammed down on top of me harder than before. Its influence exerted even in the material world. I strained my neck muscles and looked up at him. An apathetic being looked back. Orange ethereal energy shrouding his body in a protective membrane of power. His eyes were similarly completely orange. Defeat me and prove yourself worthy of the answers you seek. His voice sounded strange, as if it was layered with something else. I wasn't dealing with Uncle Iroh. I was dealing with a strange spirit who in his mortal life had been lauded as a great tactician and an even greater fire-bending prodigy. I felt something give from within me and shatter. Instantly, the world changed in my senses. The pressure from all around me seemed to disappear. I stood up in difficulty, while marveling at the lack of or at least the decrease in spiritual pressure Iroh was producing. No, not a decrease, my spirit had only adapted to that level of pressure. Adaptive physiology showed its effects better when an aspect of myself was in its weakest form. That's why it had taken such a short amount of time to evolve my spirit into the initial stage. The stage where spirit attunement was granted. In other words, I could see spirits now, nothing else. I was initially like Iroh after his journey following the death of his son, where he came back and was able to sense and see spirits. I looked down at myself, feeling a new and weak node within my being. A node full of shining light yet dim when looked at along with everything else. This raised more questions. I glanced at Iroh and took a step back in fear. My eyes widened and I gulped. What the fuck? The real Iroh was gargantuan. An orange figure the size of Korra when she first bent her form to fight Analik. Iroh easily dwarfed her. I blinked and he was back to his regular size. I won't lie, I was considering on forfeiting. Either that or cheating. The latter was out of the question, however, because just as I could cheat, so could Iroh. Based on the spiritual fluctuations coming off him, the pressure I had felt was nothing more than the lightest touch upon my soul. I accept. If I defeat you, you will answer any of the questions I have, and if you defeat me, I will do the same. I replied. The orange glow covering his form faded, leaving Iroh in his old but ripped as hell body. I couldn't sense his power at all. And that scared and both excited me. If Iroh could do it, then so could I. Granted, I don't lose my life here. I held out my hand to the side and equity appeared. I was going all out from the start. There was no way I wasn't taking Iroh seriously. Sparks of electric energy shrouded my form as I bent my legs low, leaning forward slightly. Equity had changed into a katana. Perfect for slashing. My hair stood on its head while I cycled my inner fire throughout my body. Power. Incredible power. The upper limit of what I could safely access without destroying my body was made readily available. I took one step forward, and vanished. Chapter 122, Lessons from Uncle Iroh Part 3. General P.O.V. They came about through an explosion of light and color. A myriad different shades of the latter filling up the space and leaving behind life and existence. Life that was formed between the segment of reality, thought, unreality, and logic. A section separating the possible from the impossible. Unexplainable meaning. Concrete yet entrenched in mystery. A mystery that science could not solve, at least not alone. Yet life found its way. Following them were others of similar design to their forms yet lacking. the core spark that made them special. Their being was backed and interwoven by concepts which allowed this whole space to exist. Two concepts that powered and depowered one another, forming a balance that went on to form the bigger picture, the cycle, the life, the fire. The concepts were destruction and rebirth, one hiding in the shadow of the other. It was time the master knew of them. It was time he understood. Aden's P.O.V. / A whistling sound cut through space as I swung the katana, putting enough strength to my forearms through the exertion of my back muscles and the relaxation of my shoulders. The action was swift as I passed through Iroh. Too fast for him to react. Too fast for him to see. The world felt like it had slowed down for me. I breathed out, steam escaping my mouth as I wound backwards, my left leg breaking my body, upturning soil that floated away in slow limo, almost motionless in the air. I used the right leg to turn back. The toes dug into the ground for traction and I heaved, reverse gripping equity. Another delayed whistling sound cut through the air, but the slash had already connected and carved a trail on his back. Equity disappeared back into my hammer space as I spun using the added motion from the two attacks. My eyes grew hard. The inner fire within me gathered in my hands and I rounded up on Iroh. His eyes were now just widening when the ball of condensed flames landed on his chest. The explosion of force and fire threw me away. I flipped while on the air before landing on the ground with enough force to crack it. Before me was a burning pit where Iroh's body had been. Firebending prodigy or not, my speed had turned out to be the determining factor. I walked over before suddenly stopping in place. The fire was acting strange, gathering in place, in the shape of a person instead of burning as it should have been. I felt a stir through my energy sense, thoughts cut short when a presence made itself known above me. My arms came up by instinct and I felt a foot smash into me, aimed for the top of my head. I widened my eyes when the strength became too much to bear and I fell onto one knee. Instantly, my body rolled away and the foot continued on to stomp on the ground. How was he so strong? There wasn't a time for questions, however, and to save my life, I channeled a huge amount of fire through my forearms and slammed it down to the ground, successfully parting the fan of red-hot flames that was about to drown me out. I was being attacked on two fronts. Iroh was in front of me, about to engage me in a close-quarters fight, yet that flame had appeared from way back in the fire pit, where his body had landed. "Keep your full attention on the opponent," he shouted as a shin landed onto my forearms, the calf pushed forward by a jet of flames and orange coating that registered to me as spiritual energy. My feet skidded back. Again, why and how is he strong? No benders should be this physically powerful. Right there I discovered my mistake. I was still assuming. I leaned back, avoiding a cone of fire that singed my eyebrows. My hands extended and I flipped, a wheel of flame shooting out of my feet, that Iroh leaned to the side, almost lazily, to avoid. I was upside down when I saw his leg sweep out in an arc of fire, aimed to split me horizontally in half. Fire exploded through my palms, regardless of the heat, to push me to the sky. The arc flew harmlessly below me, but then I understood the difference between Mako and Iroh. Iroh let out a grunt, steadying his arms to the side, and then he started fucking bending. Not fire bending, no, he was using different bending forms to send whips of flame, arcs, balls, cones, fans and beams to attack my defenseless body. How the fuck did that even make sense? Lightning streaks formed around my body as I skated in the air, pulling away from the general direction of his attacks. I brought my fingers to my chest, concentrating before sending a bolt of lightning to him. Iroh saw the attack from a mile away and fell into the basic lightning redirection stance. He channeled it through himself and sent it back even stronger. I formed a mesh of electric energy around my body with only a slight wince when the attack landed. Getting sick of being confined to the sky, I changed equity into Gut's sword, Dragon Slayer, a huge chunk of metal that made what I sought to do much easier. I spun my body and channeled as much flames as I could through the sword, and then I released it. An arc of hot energy shot out of the sword, blanketing the surrounding 300 meters. A large cloud of red-hot fire billowing out to decimate everything. The sound of the impact was deafening. The rocks melted, the mountain plateau nearest their battlefield was remade into a hill as most of its structure was destroyed, and below me was a crater full of burning rocks, red-hot pools of lava, surrounded by blackened soil. I looked at Equity in a new light before dismissing it. I controlled my body and landed near the edge of the crater, which was burning. That had hopefully dealt with Iroh. No one could survive that, point blank. Of course, being the idiot I was, I forgot to account for the bullshit mysterious spirit powers he had access to. The fire burning at the edge of the crater unnaturally grew in volume. Iroh suddenly appeared out of the fire with a hand cocked back in a fist. I leaned into his personal space, pulling to a close proximity so that he would extend his reach and then I could take him out. His hand passed over my shoulder, failing to hit me but giving me an opening. A blast of lightning escaped my fingers to his chest. Upon making contact, his body burst into flames and I felt something sweep me off my feet. Then a blow landed on my back hard. For the second time I dug a groove through the ground. This time, however, I jumped back into the fray, using my energy sense and telepathy to read my surroundings. Then I understood how he was doing what he was doing. The first few strikes I had landed had unfortunately been on a fire construct in the shape of Iroh. The only thing I did not know was how he had escaped my huge area of effect attack. Equity came out to defend me by way of offense as a tidal wave of flame beared down at me like an angry god. Sparks ran down the blade and I slashed out. Bright as fuck streaks of lightning escaped the blade, parting the wall of flames and causing them to separate into two sections. The view revealed to me was of three Irohs with perfect synchronized move who jumped forward, wound their hands back and released a huge but fast-moving ball of fire. Then that ball of fire bloomed like an orange flower and I found myself boxed in from 9 different directions with no way to move. Not that I was going to. I channeled as much flame as I could and created an orange tornado around me. Iroh's attack smashed into my own, but I held on with a grunt, up until his flame coalesced into 3 creatures, a giant serpent easily over 20 feet long, a tall lizard creature, known in canon as an eelhound, and lastly a fucking eastern dragon, flying above me. The serpent wound its body around my tornado and hissed, squeezing the whole whirlwind. I ducked when my energy sense felt a whip-like flame slice through my fire. The tail of the eelhound. Okay, that's how you want to play it. I pulled the fire close to me, shaping it into a ball and further compressing it before releasing it. The explosion was immediate. The serpent and eelhound were drowned out and destroyed, but the flame was halted before it could reach Iroh. The dragon from above dived down and sucked it all up. The torrential fire element was turned into a snack before the huge animal construct. The level of bullshit happening today. You seem to understand the concepts of fire as an instrument to precipitate destruction and rebirth, hence your flame is hot without changing colors into a different variation. I even commend you on knowing how to bend lightning. Iroh's voice rang out through the battlefield. But what you're missing is the practical aspect. There is a difference between knowing the rules of the game and being in it, playing. The true measure of a bender is not on how much power they can channel to fight, but on how much skill they have when using that power. In that aspect, you are crude, unrefined, impatient. He concluded, completely revealing himself. Well, 3 of himself really, but it was clear the rest were fire constructs. Still, something was amiss. I leveled Equity at him while thinking of an effective strategy to fight him. I know enough about you to know that you were not this powerful during your mortal life, Iroh. So who are you, really? The fire clones and the flame construct above our heads lost form and disappeared in a sudden rippling of angry flames, leaving the 2 of us standing inside the fire plane. I have not once lied about my identity. I am Iroh, a long time ago, the firstborn son of Fire Lord Azulon, uncle to Fire Lord Zuko, a member of the White Lotus, and the father to Lu Ten. But I am not human. It has been 200 years since I lost my mortality, he said with a look on his face I couldn't decipher. He closed his eyes for a brief period before opening them to reveal orange orbs of light. Now, I am a knowledge seeker, dedicated to the path of wisdom, intuition, and attunement to the world. The deal still stands, but I wish to add another stipulation. If you do defeat me, I shall give you access to the library of One Tong. I sucked in a deep breath. One of the ways to increase your spirituality is through consuming knowledge. However, if I win, I want to explore your world, learn the different culture, the people, the spirits. I blinked and thought it over. The library of One Tong contained practically everything on anything. If I could get inside, my bending comprehension would likely triple. Not to mention, I did not see anything wrong with letting Iroh see the DC world. It would shock him immensely, of course. The prospect of grown women and men running around dressed in tight costumes playing cops would be something I wanted to see Iroh's reaction to. Plus, I wanted him to stay a little while longer. Within a few hours, he'd helped me to evolve my spirit, and I could feel my firebending increase from a brief talk with him. So whether I lost or won, I wasn't losing out. I looked into his eyes. I accept. He nodded, stating, "Good. I should mention, this time I will not take it easy on you." I twirled equity in my hands and sent it to my hammer space. He said nothing at my action, but I could see a glint in his eyes. He saw through my intention clearly. I felt like laughing, but instead settled for a smirk. The blade appeared in my hands again. You were planning on using the blade in unexpected timings to strike. Given that you can teleport it to your hand in an instant, that is an effective strategy. He commented as I circled him. Yeah, it was, but you saw through it immediately. I guess a direct clash will have better chances now. Plus, beating you in a straight fight will feel a whole lot better. I smiled, making him grunt. Careful, do not let your overconfidence blind you. Or else you might find yourself in a sticky situation. This time I was ready. A wall of fire appeared behind me to block the hundreds of weapon constructs Iroh had remotely controlled to attack me from the back. The flame was the residue left from the animal constructs he had used before. Knowing my back was well protected through energy sense, I jumped back into the fight, but this time, it wasn't just about testing myself anymore. I had to get access to that library. Chapter 123, Lessons from Uncle Iroh, Final Part. Unknown P.O.V, Fireplane. It was time. No more waiting. He was in danger. General P.O.V. This time the energy was supercharged. Aden knew what was at stake, and he was determined not to lose. Iroh calmly looked at him, but by the slight narrowing of his eyes, you could tell he was taking Aden seriously. To be honest, he was surprised. Shocked even. To think that the Avatar was not a figure exclusive to his world. Iroh of course knew about the existence of other realms, past the conceptual boundaries of the infinitely large spirit world. But these circumstances were very unusual. A boy just a little older than Zuko when he found his true path in life, with the power to wield fire to a degree that was frankly frightening. The power he could exert rivaled a Grandmaster Firebender during Sozin's Comet. It was that scary. His technique was mechanical and stiff, but he more than compensated for that with his powerful body and ingenious use of lightning to increase his speed and reaction time. That was, as far as Iroh was concerned, never seen before and impossible. The energy should have shredded his body from within. And that weapon, it was strangely powerful. A blade that could change forms and ease the effort needed to channel fire and lightning through it? This new world was intriguing and very enticing to a spirit of knowledge like him. Which is why Iroh came up with the offer. He wanted to learn the difference between this world and his own. The difference between this Avatar and Aang, Korra, or Genji. But the other reason was that he wanted to see the lengths this Avatar could go to. Hopefully, steer him along the right path, because a dark Avatar was something no world would survive. His heart had grown cold when he felt just how much strain Aden's spirit was under. Iroh could not let the world see another Anellic. It's what he owed. All these thoughts went through his mind quickly as he tensed his body, before relaxing the next second. It had been a long time since he had wielded his bending, but the motions had been ingrained into his mind so much that even in his much more flexible spiritual form, he didn't feel rusty. He took a deep breath and exhaled, feeling the familiar warmth push through his chest cavity and escape his nose as steam. Aiden's P.O.V. Equity was in a reverse grip as I ran forward at high speeds. The wall of fire behind me blocked the weapon constructs, courtesy of the Grandmaster Firebender I had to beat. Somehow, Iroh stepped forward and punched out. The action sent a generic flame ball towards me that I evaded, then I slapped the next one to the side and jumped over another one. I flipped in the air and came down with an axe kick at his position. A fire arc proceeded to shoot out of my ankle. Iroh smiled and grunted, raising his hands to the sky in a move that looked like something an earthbender would do. Orange flames bloomed on top of his hands in the shape of a tornado, warping my own attack so that they canceled each other. At that point I was already touching down. "Escape this," I said and slashed out towards his neck. Energy Sense had already assured me I was dealing with the genuine article. I was dealing with the real Iroh. It started with a slight pressure through my energy sense and then heat. I closed my eyes while pulling back my extending hand with equity gripped on it to cover my body. Explosions rocked my body from one side to the other, and these genuinely hurt. I was thrown away a smoking form, while equity was held at my front in a huge bastard sword-size form. A chunk of hard metal that protected me from the worst of the blasts. Fuck! My Metallica t-shirt was left in dregs. I rose up, wobbling a little. Damn it! I breathed out. You covered the area around your body with small balls of condensed flame, set to explode when I came into contact with them. And because your flame can't hurt you, you weren't in any danger. Clever. I commented, feeling a rush of adrenaline. Iroh had the experience to take me on without a problem. I couldn't remember the last time I was this challenged. It was exhilarating. You're correct. What are you going to do now? He asked, referring to the fact that I couldn't get close to him without setting off the landmines? Air mines? You get the point. But he wasn't the only one with a few tricks up his sleeve. Let's try this again, I stated as the coating of electric energy washed down on my form. Intense and cutting. I pulled on my inner energy some more. My top speed in this form was about 300 miles per hour, give or take. It was not nearly enough for what I intended to do, but coupling that speed with Iroh's own skill, that I decided to steal, and maybe I could pull it off. But first I needed a distraction. I exploded forth, pouring out as much speed as I could. The hand holding equity pulled back and I threw the sword towards Iroh and then changed its form from a katana into an oversized sword, shaped like Bustermarm from Fairy Tail. A sword that crossed the boundary from being intimidating to plain goofy. But it accomplished what it set out to do. Explosions rang out as the sword speared through them, barely changing its course. Iroh jumped over it and started running along its length towards my position in some gravity-defying speed. The old firebender turned spirit, jumped off the pommel, just as I dismissed equity and fell down towards me, fireballs raining down on my form, that I batted away with equity in its bastardized form, this time looking like Asta's Demon Slayer sword. The fireballs were sent back to Iroh, who simply unraveled them. Before he touched down, he timed the impact of his fall with a spread-out flame explosion that took everything out wantonly. I jumped over the screen of flames and responded with a pillar of super-hot fire down on his position, an attack that would have taken someone else out instantly. The pillar of fire was sliced apart by a thin but highly compressed arc of flame that went on to curve a slice on my chest. I winced in pain and stepped on a platform of fire to flip away, landing on the ground, only to find Iroh at close proximity. His palm was extended to the right in a slight diagonal trajectory, a move that would split me shoulder to hip. I widened my eyes as the blow landed, Iroh grunting as the fire in his hands turned into a severely hot arc that met with barely any resistance from my body. Instead of blood, however, the afterimage I had formed with a combination of fire constructs and pure speed lost its form and exploded in front of Iroh. The initial blast set off a chain of more explosions that ragdolled the firebender from all sides, using his own stolen move. But I wasn't done. Got ya, I thought, appearing behind him like a ghost. A gyrating white ball that had a small sheen of blue covering its form in my palm. Azula could form a lightning ball, it stands to reason that I could too. The ball landed on Iroha's back and I released it, blasting him towards the sky in a burst of energy that ended with a fiery explosion of light and streaks of blue lightning. That was everything I had. After that, I unsteadily took a knee. Something felt wrong, as if my body had reached its current limit. Of course I had had to push myself even faster for that ploy to work. The exact speed needed to make one afterimage is 38,146 miles per hour. As an example, Gon made about 4 to 5 afterimages during his match with Hisoka, so he was moving at about 150,000 to 200,000 miles per hour. I was nowhere near that level of speed. Good lord, I couldn't imagine any other speedster on Earth-16 ever hitting that level of speed either. Besides the Flash and his grandson from the future, Impulse of course. Those numbers were pretty inconsistent though given different laws of physics in each world, so I used them as more of a reference point. So, long story short, I had used fire as the shell to leave an imprint of me while in more of a sudden burst of speed than my consistent peak, I rushed forward. The sudden burst was probably like 500 miles per hour all things considered. But now my body, particularly my legs and back muscles felt to be on the verge of breaking. But at least I had one, right? I breathed out in disappointment as a fast-moving object pinged on my energy sense. Iroh was trying to disapprove of my notion. Fuck, what do I need to do to take him down? I clumsily rolled away from whatever it was and stood up just as the dust and smoke from the explosion died away. My feet felt like they would give away from use, but at least my enhanced healing was working overtime to ease the pain. Thank you, adaptive physiology. Equity was back in my hands in its sword form, ready for an thing. I trailed off in thought as my eyes widened. I looked up and found myself standing before a giant made of orange. Iroha's full spiritual form. A gigantic man easily above 20 meters tall. I had seen it briefly after gaining my new skill of spirit attunement, but I had just thought it to be the aura his presence took, but for him to turn into a huge astral projection so suddenly was throwing me off my game. Defeating him in his regular form had been hard already, but now I had to fight this leveled up version of him? I tapped into my spirit attunement and shut the skill off instantly. His presence was overwhelming. Iroh pulled back his leg, which I understand had been what I had evaded, and raised it. I jumped out of the way as he stomped the ground on my position. The surroundings shook and rumbled. Sections of the earth broke off and the plateau that had been reduced to a hill was now reduced to a mound of rock and soil. I took to the air with my jet flames to escape the onslaught and come up with an effective strategy. Then I found out that Iroh was not the least bit slower in this form. I couldn't move fast enough out of the way of his palm. So I turned Equity into its anime-sized sword and covered my back. The smack came in loud and instant. It seemed like the ground came up to meet me instead of the other way around. A crater formed under me as I heaved, breath taken out of my lungs by the impact. I spat out blood, not knowing if it came from my bust lip or something else. My eyesight struggled to focus as Iroh came to my position. I was going to lose. No, I couldn't give up. I don't want to give up. Come on! I shouted at myself as I shook my head in disorientation. My fingers stabbed into the soil and slow but sure, I rose up. Only for my knees to shake and for me to fall down in a heap again. Okay, so that way is out. I thought as I laid down on my back, sprawled out. My eyes focused enough that I saw Iroh peer down at me. His form impeccably strong. His gaze having changed from that of a caring and wise old man into a combatant who had seen more than enough of war and suffering. Who was I kidding thinking I could have beat him? Defeated someone with years of experience with a measly 3 months of my own experience under my belt. It sounded laughable. Still, this fight was his only one I couldn't fight back. As long as I had my wits about me, I was not going to give up. Time for a dangerous move. I couldn't move my body, but Equity could more than channel the element for me. I need every ounce of inner energy I had within me, going a step further and taking a risk. I started mixing electric energy and thermal energy. Iroh must have known what I was going to do as he raised his leg once more, intent on knocking me out with a sudden stomp. And unfortunately, he was faster. His foot came down before I could fully attack. I closed my eyes and waited for darkness only to see and feel light bloom through my eyelids and energy sense. I opened my eyes and saw a winding blue and purple shining coat, the shade giving off a feeling of power through its panorama of color. A familiar figure. The small dragon had intervened. A breath of energy left her mouth as her front limbs gripped Iroh's giant foot with her claws. The energy was not regular fire, but something of a darker purple. Shades deeper than the dragon patriarch's and oh so much stronger. Iroh was pushed back by it and the small dragon turned to me. Hurt? I got from a link that had naturally slotted in place between us. Weirdly, it was 2 links instead of 1. Not hurt. Just tired. Really tired. I answered back. She floated closer to me and looked into my eyes. Questioning. Intelligent. Help? Once again she asked, offering. I would appreciate it. Not really seeing how she could help. And turns out I was right. She couldn't help, but the other one could. In the shadow of the small purple and blue dragon, one colored in green and white emerged. My mouth opened a little in shock. That's who the second link belonged to. There were 2 of them. The new dragon seemed to be shy in comparison to his sister, but he still pulled in close to me and asked the same question. Intelligence blooming inside his eyes too. Help? I nodded, noticing I could tell their genders even before I heard their voices. Feminine for the female and masculine for the male, just really young. Like the voices you would expect from 2 8-year-olds. Yes, please. If I could move, I could finish this fight, once and for all. Iroh had gone into his spirit form because I had hurt him in his human one. And now that he was a bigger target, there wasn't a shortage of places I could hit. The blue and purple dragon rubbed its head on my shoulder before winding up and flying towards Iroh to distract him as I got back on my feet. The green dragon touched its forehead into mine and I felt a white and pure flame run through my body, filling me with energy and power, while also telling me what the dragons were. My shock and surprise was palpable. But it soon gave way to determination and hope. Maybe I could actually win this. That was the first meeting between me and 2 of the first spirits of the elemental dimension. Hakai and Sazay. The spirits of destruction and rebirth. The spirits of the fire plane. My first sapient creations. Chapter 124, One Final Clash. General P.O.V. Saturn Girl placed a hand on Chameleon Boy's shoulder, pulling him back. Remember, we can't move too close or be seen. She whispered at him. I know. But I just wanted to see it for myself, before he changed it into his official team base. Chameleon Boy explained, still trying to peek at the Club Lux building. Saturn Girl nodded in understanding before a flash of light behind them made them look back at a suddenly flushed Phantom Girl hiding a small camera behind her. Sorry, I just wanted a picture. Saturn Girl sighed. You do both know that it's not even his official base, right? SHH. Someone's coming, let's get out of here. We still need to find out Lorzod's whereabouts. He might have gotten his hands on the Phantom Zone projector already. Aiden's P.O.V. I rubbed Sazay's snout affectionately. Thanks, buddy. I told him and scratched his chin. Then I turned my attention back to the fight happening. Hakai was harassing Iroh with some quick and swift attacks. Her winding flight pattern was not allowing him to do much, but she couldn't get closer either due to Iroh's not surprising battlefield intelligence. Ant-Man gets huge and he's a blundering mess, Iroh gets huge and he's a fucking combat titan, so not fair. I looked at Sazay, who protectively hovered above me. I don't suppose you guys have a way we can take him down, right? I asked jokingly. What I was not expecting was an answer. Yes. Sazay answered, and a second later, I understood what he meant as information poured into my mind. A smile spread out on my lips. If this actually works, I'm introducing you both to Grangos as a way to say thanks. I said out loud. Saze and his sister were proposing one all-out attack. One final clash and winner takes all. I could do this. Let's go, boy. I patted the dragon and stated, jumping on top of his back. Saze exploded forth in motion. His flight speed was controlled and still fast enough to put my earlier efforts to shame. I pulled up closer to Iroh, standing up slightly as I brandished equity in my right arm. Hawkeye kept harassing him but pulled back once I arrived on scene, level with the gargantuan man's face. I fully stood up on Saze's back, Hawkeye flanking us to the right. Iroh! This fight has gone on for too long. I propose we finish this in one final move. One final attack to decide who the victor will be. I declared. My hand firmly on equity. I could feel Saze's back muscles tensing. Whether out of fear or excitement, I had no idea. I delved into the links I had with the twins and reassured them, sending them feelings of comfort. Instantly, I could feel both spirits calm down. I agree, young Avatar. Show me your full strength. Iroh's voice boomed out, sending a gust of wind that ruffled my clothes. After saying that, something seemed to change with him. His presence dimmed in my senses as a hum filled the air. I clenched my hand in preparation as although he felt weaker, the air on my skin rose up. Something was happening. Iroh's orange form started pulsing and his spiritual aura spread out from his body to cover the surroundings. My eyes widened when I felt the area covered by his influence disappear from my realm master control. He was creating a domain. His energy suddenly exploded past the level he had shown before and I felt like an idiot for letting him power up. The spiritual domain seemed to increase his strength by magnitudes. Luckily I had a trump card up my sleeve as well, courtesy of my two new friends. I jumped off Saze and stood between him and his sister on a platform made up of fire. It's time. Are you ready? I told them and felt waves of confirmation come through the links. Let's do this then. For the first time ever, I didn't change equity into a weapon that I needed. Instead, I delved through our connection and allowed it to change into the best form for bending fire. The best form for channeling that thermal energy. The best form that would allow maximum efficiency. Equity glowed and lost its katana form. The handle grew longer as the blade shortened but became much broader at the head. Intricate cursive lines were drawn on its length, adding more beauty to the final product. A beautiful and strong lance/spear was the end result. It felt light in my hands, yet its structure was incredibly dense in my senses. I gripped it tight and breathed out. One final move to end this. Iroh's domain seemed to steadily raise his energy and he now had his hands placed on his hips, mouth open in a wordless scream as he powered up. I mentally connected with any dragons 100 miles in the vicinity and instructed them to leave. They complied, allowing me to prepare my own attack. Saze and Hawkeye were both an enigma. And even the plan to defeat Iroh that the twins had shown me was something I had never seen before from canonical spirits. Spirits can embody concepts, that much is true, but the only case of a spirit combining with a mortal to give that mortal access to the concept was in the case of the Avatar, where Rava combined with one or Vatu with Unelec. Saze and Hawkeye were proposing the same thing. That we meld our spirits together, hopefully giving me access to their unique abilities. Saze's powerful rejuvenating flames and Hawkeye's powerful destruction flames. Shocking? Yes, I know. However, despite being a different flavor of an avatar, my intuition told me it wouldn't work, which was honestly a real bummer. Up until now, I had no idea if I possessed Rava or a higher spirit of order or balance, or if my avatar state was essentially bearing all that weight. Iroh could no doubt help me understand more, but for that to happen, I had to end this. However, there was another way. Saze and Hawkeye could not fuse with me, but they could temporarily do so with equity. I held up the spear to the sky. My spiritual attunement showed me how Saze and Hawkeye's energy started melding with the weapon. Both dragons flew up in a winding path, dancing in the air in a lovely pattern before plunging into the weapon. A blast of light exploded out of my form and I was left holding a lance glowing with power. My body felt strengthened to its peak, no doubt an effect from Saga, and Equity was brimming with a purple energy that felt hungry and full of uncontrollable rage. Iroh and I stared at one another from the distance, like gods about to clash over the fate of the mortal world. I was not going to lose this. We moved at the same time, a shout of effort coming out of my mouth at the exertion, at the power I was feeling. Equity screamed through the air as I swung it. A huge pillar of destructive flames, seeking to only decimate, poured out of the weapon. Iroh stepped forward and pushed his hands out. The action seemed heavy as he grunted. His own orange flames, much more even and penetrative but the same size as my own, exploded out. Both flame attacks met in the air and space screeched. I was going to win this. It wasn't a question of if. I thrust out Equity and felt Hawkeye's power double. My pillar of dark purple flames grew in intensity and my shirt, smoked before falling away, turned to ash. I quickly covered my pants in a layer of Saga's flame energy to shield them from the heat. Sweat dotted my forehead and skin while I looked on, grasping Equity in both hands. Iroh took a step back as my attack started overwhelming his. I pushed some more, seeing my victory at hand. Below me, the ground started suffering. The rocks and stones begun melting and burning away, covering the whole area in smoke. Just a little more, just a little more. Iroh's domain seemed to blink out in instances before finally, it broke and I made the final push, drowning him in power. Yes! I flew in to land the finishing blow when I felt an impact slam into my being without a warning. There was no pain except for a jarring motion. My vision suddenly turned white. I blinked my eyes open and found myself standing in the middle of a gray space. What the? My voice echoed out strangely. I'd just been in a fight with Iroh. Where the fuck was I now? Is this a dream? Or was I just teleported? I pinched myself and felt a light pain. The sensation was there but muted, as if I was filtering the feeling through layers. So not a dream. At least not completely. Hello? Hello? I called out. Nothing answered back. I shrugged and decided to walk around, searching for a way out. The first step I took made something happen. Cracks appeared on the pristine gray floor running out across the whole area. You harm everything. You're not an avatar. A very familiar voice said from behind me. I looked back and came face to face with Aang. For a second we both said nothing, and then I smiled while cocking my head. Really? This is the best my subconscious or whoever is responsible could come up with? A guilt trip? Don't make me laugh. Frankly, I am insulted. My voice rang out through the gray space. I now understood what was happening. This was a spirit attack. Iroh's last move. That's the only thing that made sense. So to escape, the only thing I had to do was delve into my connection with Hawkeye and Saga and use that link to wake up. The fact that I could pinch myself and perceive pain, which was a body reaction, showed me I wasn't completely removed from my body as I thought I was. You are not a real. The Aang copy started out like a broken record. Avatar. Yes, I know that, and to be completely honest, I love it that way. Because if I was your normal kind of avatar, I would be limited. Limited by your experiences, limited by the world's expectations, and compared to my past lives. Who wants that kind of existence? I will use this power to carve out my own destiny, Aang. Just watch me. I ranted, feeling my conviction grow stronger. I breathed out and stared back into the eyes of one of my childhood heroes. That wasn't all. I know you're not really here and that it probably wouldn't mean much even if you were to hear this, but I'll say it anyway, for what it's worth, I am sorry. Somehow, I felt lighter. I turned my back on him and mentally connected with Hawkeye and Saga to go back to the real world. The gray work broke into pieces around me and I opened my eyes, finding myself lying on Hawkeye's back before Iroh. I sat up, rubbing the small dragon's back. Saze was back in his sister's shadow. You must love tea a lot, I commented, referring to the table with a set of cups and a kettle pouring out steam between us. Iroh laughed. A guilty pleasure of mine, I'll concede. I hummed, reaching out for a cup. May I? I asked with a smile. Iroh nodded back with a matching one on his face. Help yourself. I brought the cup before my nose and breathed it in. The aroma calmed me down. I took a sip and sighed out in contentment. My body instantly felt a relaxation seep through my muscles and bones. So, you won, I stated, looking up at Iroh. Yes. Yes, I believe I did. I raised an eyebrow. This shameless old man. Iroh looked at my expression and laughed, his belly jiggling. I couldn't help it, I also started chuckling. I might have lost the fight, but something told me I'd won something more valuable. Chapter 125, The Weight of the Avatar Mantle. General P.O.V. You have questions. Questions I am sure you have had for some time. If you're smart as I believe you are, questions that you will keep on asking and wondering about even after getting the answers you seek. Because you can never be too careful when a mantle such as the Avatar is placed on your shoulders. Whichever being or beings chose you, did it for a reason? The Avatar is not just a figure of absolute power in my world, he or she represents a deterrent force of good. A keeper of balance and a beacon of oneness. Of harmony. They have the whole world in the palm of their hands. Removed from the day-to-day nuisances that plague normal folk, yet their influence can be felt through every nation. The cycle is a part of why his personage is very significant. However, the weight of that mantle is less obvious. The Avatar is a figure of order, balance, harmony, power and immortality, which is both a curse and a blessing, and the weight that can never be relinquished to another. A soldier fights knowing that they will either lose their lives in battle or win the war and go back to his family when the fight is over. The Avatar has no escape even in death. Every death is simply a new beginning. To continue the never-ending fight with chaos. The never-ending struggles with the fickle morality of men. I lived through a time of great suffering. Some of it caused by my own hands. I have seen things I want to forget dearly but cannot. Yet, the Avatar has lived through dozens of wars, times of so great a strife, the world seemed to be on the brink of total destruction. I need you to understand. That weight never gets easier. Which is why, to bear that weight of memories and experiences, the Avatar's spirit is much stronger in comparison to a normal human's. Their soul is blinding in its light. Powerful enough to enforce a balance between the material world and the spirit world. Iroh concluded his explanation on the true weight Aden carried on his shoulders. The teen had never thought about it that far deep. But he felt that those were words he had needed to hear. To never lose his purpose and to know just what sort of burden he was tasked with. Aden had teleported them out of the fire plane onto an island far away from Sanctuary. A fire burned between them, providing light in the gazebo Aden had constructed some time back, with the intention of relaxation. The tea table set was off to the side, the kettle still pouring out steam. The island itself boasted a clear reef that was filled with coral outcrops. Fish of different kinds swam through the water, providing a beautiful obstructed scenery of marine life. As it was nighttime, the sky was awash with the light of stars. Despite the elemental dimension being huge, measuring hundreds of thousands of miles, all that area was confined to 5 sections of land separated by space-time shenanigans. Each section represented an element, so there was no way the stars shining above were part of Aden's creation. The most likely explanation was that it was a scene of the normal view of the night sky from planet Earth. Unfortunately, Aden could not recognize any of the constellations. He hadn't really tried to figure it out, content in just enjoying the scene without ruining the magic. I understand you're still curious about what sort of being I am. What is your understanding about spirits? Iroh asked the teen. Aden affectionately ran his hand over Hawkeye's scales, absent-mindedly. Well, not a lot. I didn't even know that Hawkeye and Sazay were spirits until they intervened in our fight. I only thought that Hawkeye was a special but curious dragon. The spirit in question nuzzled her snout onto his neck, making Aden chuckle a little at the action. Dumb. Hawkeye spoke through the link, referring to Aden's mistake about their identity. Iroh laughed as Aden scratched his head in a little embarrassment. I mean, if he'd been a little bit more attentive, he could have found that out easily, but oh well. My knowledge about spirits is not expansive enough. All I know is that they are supernatural entities that often embody concepts of life and nature. They live in a parallel plane of reality that coexists alongside the mortal world. A textbook response. Not wrong, but woefully shallow. Spirits are more than just supernatural entities embodying different concepts. At some point, that embodiment becomes so concrete that they themselves become that concept. That case only happens when a spirit fully crosses over to the mortal world, however. We have had a few instances of this happening. Tui and La. The ocean and moon spirits are prime examples of this. Iroh took a sip of his tea as Aden nodded in contemplation. What about Hawkeye and Sazay? You said that a spirit could fully cross over to the mortal world. Does that mean that there is a different plane of existence where they came from, or were they actualized as full spirits of fire? Aden wondered. The implications not lost to him. The existence of his own version of the spirit world existing right under him without his own knowledge would be disconcerting. Iroh shook his head, scratching his beard in slight puzzlement. In the case of Hawkeye and Sazay, I find myself similarly stumped. To know more about their origins, you will have to strengthen your spirit and learn how to meditate. The Avatar is the bridge between the mortal world and the spirit plane. As I mentioned earlier, your spirit is much weaker than even a spiritually attuned bender from my world. Aden nodded, trying to figure out how he was going to deal with this new information. Oh, one more thing, how did you become a spirit? Aden questioned before he forgot. He already had a lot to think about. Iroh stilled and placed the cup in his hands back on the table set beside him. His face looked grim above the fire as he stared back at the young Avatar. Silence dominated the grounds until Aden thought the old general was not going to answer. Iroh sighed, suddenly looking older. War is impure. You can never know its price until the pain you inflict on your enemies is felt by you. After losing my son, Lu Ten, I lost my purpose and drive. And for a firebender, conviction is needed to muster up the energy inside us. I used that excuse to leave, but the truth was, I was finally fed up. Karma had caught up to me and extracted her fair price. I needed to find myself again, for I was changed man. So I journeyed across the lands, trying to piece back the shards of my soul. During that time, I saw firsthand the impact of my actions. The impact of the Fire Nation's hubris. All that pain and hatred fueled for a meaningless campaign to conquer a world that was already united through the Avatar under one banner. I sought to know the real truth about how, where, and when it all went wrong. And the understanding I came to was that I could not understand my grandfather's actions. This further led to me wanting to know more about the fickleness of human morality. From Sozin's point of view, he was not doing anything wrong and the Fire Nation thrived under his rule, yet he was a monster to others. Who chooses what values to follow and instill? Sozin chose an extreme form of patriotism. A world that was driven forward by the teachings and principles of firebending. Yet, his goals blinded his eyes to the truth that the nations were different for a reason but not separate. I learned of the Avatar's true role in existence. A never-ending crusade to maintain balance, stretched out over hundreds of years, and I learned from history, his true purpose. It was not to keep the world safe or balanced, it was to keep the world moving. No matter how many wounds it sustained, the Avatar was merely a panacea to the symptoms. Content to lie in wait to deal with the next crisis that arose. Crisis formed by the combination of two things, human immorality and bending. Iroh's face grimaced. I entered a dark phase then. Coming to the conclusion that war, pain, and suffering would not stop. This war would end, only for another to spring up long after I was gone. And the reason for that was twofold. I could not change how people think, but I could change their instrument to inflict pain on others. Bending. Aden sucked in a breath. The look on Iroha's face as he recalled his life, it looked like the face of someone who had been saved from committing a despicable act. Bending was at fault. Bending was the reason my son was stolen from me. Bending was the root of all evil. Iroh closed his eyes. Grief oftentimes can bring out the worst in us. I wanted to burn the world, to rid it of this cursed affliction. To me, Bending was the enemy, and so I set out to find a way I could kill this affliction. The only lead I had was spirits. So I journeyed everywhere, my heart blazing with conviction and fire. Each step I took dimmed that fire, however. Because just as I was convinced that Bending was evil and bad, I saw pure acts of love and joy that it also brought. The waterbenders used it to provide clean water and heal, the earthbenders used it to build new structures and save people from the Fire Nation. And the tales as well as the philosophies of the airbenders showed me their tranquil approach to life. They loved, lived, and died holding on to the purest expression of their own bending. By the end of my journey, as I stood before Wan Shi Tong, I was completely exhausted. Exhausted by my hate for earthbenders and firebenders and bending in general, I only wanted it all to stop. For me to go back to those peaceful times underneath the sakura tree with my son. Wan Shi Tong showed me a new path, one of wisdom and true union of consciousness with the world. Inside that library, I was touched by a spirit, which allowed me to attain spiritual attunement. I learned all I could, and then said to the world to curve out my path. Not to defeat or stop the Fire Nation, but to show them a different way. At the end of my life, that touch by a spirit coupled with my own spiritual growth enabled me to ascend as a spirit of knowledge seeking and wisdom. Iroh completed his story. At the end of it, Aden knew what to do. The teen knelt on his knees and bowed, his forehead touching the ground in heartfelt humility. Please teach me, Grandmaster. Chapter 126, Young Justice Interlude. General P.O.V., north of Japan, Sea of Okhotsk. We should escape, this is soon not how. I wanted to spend my weekend. Wally complained, breathing heavily. He dropped the 2 buckets of water he was carrying on the ground to swat a mosquito that was trying to land on his face. With super speed then he caught the buckets before they could fall more than an inch. He bent his legs to keep the same angle as before, in line with the rules. Don't let him hear you complain or else he will torture us even more. Artemis whispered at their resident speedster. She was tired but was not as out of breath as Wally. She nudged him with her foot to keep walking. Robin was already a couple of steps ahead of them, straining under his load. The goal was to carry 2 buckets of water on both hands. The twist being the arms needed to be outstretched straight to the sides. If any of them were seen lowering them for even a second, a pebble would shoot out of the darkening forest and hit them. It gets worse. Whenever any of them were hit, another trip down the mountain towards the stream was added. Wally had already added 1 trip to their initial 10. The speedster being impatient and thinking he could cheat by using his super speed. This sort of exercise was nothing to Robin. Batman was harsher to him during any of their spars. However, that notion was quickly broken as more and more trips were added to the initial number. His arms shook, tired and stiff. The weight had not increased whatsoever, but the strain had more than doubled after each successive trip. It didn't help that the mountain was steep. They were currently in an island near Japan called Kumashijima. It was inhabited due to the weird weather phenomenon and ocean currents that made docking on the island a headache. Okay, I agree. This is so not how I wanted to spend my weekend either. Robin said. They had finally done it. They had filled up the clay tank he had instructed them to. I just want pizza, a nice, hot long shower and sleep. Artemis added from her position. Me too, but add like 50 more pizza slices, something to drink, a soda maybe, then churros, fries, a burger and then a shower and sleep. Hugh. Artemis commented at Wally's voracious appetite, making Robin chuckle a little. Then their own personal torture expert appeared. If you have the energy to laugh and talk, it means you're ready to go again. Of course they groaned. Richard Dragon laughed, hands on his hips, as he remembered the exercises O-sensei had ingrained into them. Him, Bruce, Shiva and Ben had faced similar challenges, and he honestly wondered how they even made it out intact. Then again, everything O-sensei instructed them to do was an exercise that hid the lesson underneath layers of pain, frustration, and exhaustion. Richard was only continuing the legacy. Get up or you're going for another trip down the mountain. Your choice, he told them with a glint in his eyes. God, Gan had the right idea to train with her uncle. Wally grumbled as they all got back up. To think that these island getaways were planned for 3 more weekends made Artemis wish she'd known what they'd been getting into. Then again, while Richard was a slave driver, he was no crusher. Her dad was an aggressive piece of shit that didn't know when to stop. Elsewhere, Earth's atmosphere. Gan, your telepathic potential is the highest I have ever seen. And that is taking into account both sister planets. Your technique, however, lacks finesse. John Johns informed his niece. They were above the Earth's atmosphere on Bioship. The walls of the Martian craft provided a clear see-through scenery of space and the Earth in all its glory. For some time now, I have wanted to complete your lessons with no interruptions or distractions. Manhunter told her, prompting Gan to blush and look away as the image of Connor and then of Aden appeared in her mind. I don't know what you mean, Uncle, she said bashfully. Manhunter smiled fondly. Very well, Gan. Now it's important we get right to it. The mind is a flexible tool with practically no limits. It's how we perceive the world. How we attach meaning to nebulous, tangible and intangible aspects of reality. Our eyes see, our ears listen, our noses smell, our tongues taste flavors and our skin feels, but that is not the true Christmas of reality. It's all the mind attaching definition to our perceptions. Gan nodded as she listened attentively. Uncle John was one of the premier manhunters in her home world. If there was anyone who could help her get to a level where she could harmlessly take down Aden by the use of her mind, it would be him. Martians are blessed with the capability to mend or break a mind. The latter is something abhorred. Each mind is a sanctuary to the core of oneself. Mess with one and I wouldn't wish that fate upon my worst enemies. Gan rubbed her hand nervously. Sometimes her fear and anger felt overwhelming to the point where she could feel herself losing control of that power. Especially during the fight with Aden, she had felt as if she was on the brink of blasting him apart. Her friend who had betrayed her and left. The prime reminder of her past sins. Aden had betrayed them, just as she had betrayed her brother Mcom. What if she had another bad day and Gan, your psychic presence is in disarray. Calm down. Her uncle's voice brought her back. He looked concerned and worried, making her feel guilty. She took a few deep breaths and calmed herself down to ease his worries. Perhaps we should move on to our lesson on shape-shifting? We can come back to the mind exercises later on, Manhunter suggested. Gan nodded, happy and relieved with the suggestion. Yes, that would be great, Uncle. Elsewhere, Poseidoni's Atlantis. There is no such thing as weak sorcery. Only a weak practitioner. In simple terms, magic is a tool to access the world's vast impalpable resources. Magic and sorcery are the basis of mystical powers. Again, magic can be considered a substance and sorcery the manipulation of that substance. It can be a shortcut, but I advise you not to think of it that way. Magic always comes with a price. That is the first rule you should know. It is as ironclad as the foundations of Poseidoni's itself. If you exhaust your magical reserves, the spell will take from your vim vitae or life force, so be advised, never bite off more than you can chew. Queen Mara, the headmistress of the Conservatory of Sorcery and the Atlantean Minister of Magic, was giving a lecture to the first-year class. Connor was a part of it and he was bored. That is not to say he wasn't attentive or did not get what she was explaining. However, Connor wanted to get right into it. But he understood he had to take matters slow. His fists clenched. He would do anything to get that feeling of power again. This time, however, he was going to keep it. His hand shot up and caught the pen thrown at him from the head of the class. Queen Mara looked at him with her eyes narrowed. "Connor, I expect you to pay full attention to the lecture when you're in my class," she said sternly. A few giggles sounded out from the other students. Connor cleared his throat. "Sorry, headmistress." "Understood," he said, pressing down on the urge to blow up rudely. He wasn't that short-fused guy anymore. He liked to believe he had changed. Queen Mara nodded. "Good. Moving on. Anyone can use magic. But not everyone is naturally gifted or possesses the necessary requirements to become adept. Let me explain, Atlanteans are all natural magic users. The first of Atlantean Homo Magi were descended from Arion, and over thousands of years through breeding, that gene has been passed down generations, ensuring that almost every Atlantean can use magic, but to varying degrees. The more pure and closer your bloodline is to Arion, the more easily sorcery comes to you." Connor's hand rose up. "You have a question, Connor?" He nodded. "I just wanted to know, what if you don't have that Homo Magi gene? For example, in the case of a normal human." It was something he wondered due to his own special heritage. Superman was a Kryptonian, and his powers came from a biological source rather than a mystical one, and his other side was Luthor. And from what he knew, he was more into science than sorcery. Otherwise, being as resourceful as Luthor was, there was no doubt he would tap into magic and bring about a fresh hell for Superman. A good question. Homo Magi are hardly exclusive to Atlanteans. People like Zatara are natural magic wielders. Homo Magi use a form of magic called direct magic. However, in the case of people with no talent for that, they practice indirect magic. The whole branch is called occultism, where practitioners channel magic through objects to power their sorcery. Connor's eyes lit up. So there was a way. "Is that what the Atlanteans' tattoos are?" he asked, curious about Calder's water-bearers and glowing skin. "No, the skin icons are used to enhance sorcery. In my case, I can still use magic even without activating them. However, activating the inscriptions can help increase the effects of your sorcery." When the lecture ended, Connor felt that he had made the right choice. He waited until everyone had filed out of the class before walking over towards Queen Mara. "Yes, Connor, what can I do for you?" she asked, turning her attention from her tomes. "I wanted to ask, is there a way to find out if I have the Homo Magi gene?" Connor had decided he would try everything. If it turned out he didn't have the natural access to magic, then occultism it was. Either way, he wasn't giving up. Chapter 127, The Air Spirit. Aden's P.O.V. A chilly breeze ruffled my hoodie. Luckily, I had made sure to always have a change of clothes waiting for me just in case I went ham during training. And I was grateful that I thought that far ahead, because after the fight with Iroh, I had come out looking like a homeless person who had survived a bomb blast from close range, but luckily was a Kryptonian with hardened skin and didn't suffer any injuries except for their clothes getting destroyed. Don't mind the absurd analogy. It was proof of just how tired I was that my brain couldn't come up with anything better. Anyway, a few hours had gone by after our spar, the evening transitioning fully into night. Sanctuary at least seemed to follow the same day and night cycle as the outside world. However, the two elemental planes did not seem to have a day and night rotation. They stayed the same, regardless of time. It made for some weird incidences where you felt out of sync with the world, transitioning from daylight to night time. Iroh and I had talked about a lot of things, chief of whom being to address the potential presence of another spirit in my elemental dimension. Unfortunately, I hadn't had a lot of time in the air dimension, because my attention had mostly been focused on mastering firebending. Iroh stressed the importance of forming a bond or at least a connection with the resident spirit if there was one, to avoid hostility as I encroached in its territory. A feature of the elemental dimension was that nothing could hurt me, whether direct or indirect. I had full control and precedence inside. I was the master, creator, and god of this realm. There was no other sovereignty above me. So I knew the chances of hostility were astronomically low to the point of being impossible. However, he had a point. Plus, he was now my teacher. Kinda. I still had no idea what he was going to teach me. In fact, we hadn't talked about it. I might have jumped the gun on that one. Still, it felt like the right thing to do at the time. Iroh was a wealth of knowledge. I would be a fool not to learn from him. Iroh and I sat in meditation poses while facing each other. He had stressed that meditation allowed oneself to calm the mind and open their spiritual awareness out into the world. Before we begin, I need to understand something. You asked to be my student, are you absolutely sure about that? It is a commitment you cannot back away from. He questioned me seriously. I took a minute to think through my decision. I had never had a teacher. That is if you discount Canary's instructions on martial arts. But this was different. This felt more tangible. More. Like Batman and Robin. The only difference was I knew Iroh would question my decisions but never interfere. He wasn't Batman. I was wary of putting myself under someone's tutelage like that because my pride rebelled against someone above me. It shouted out that I had done fine on my own. But the first step towards growth for me was accepting I needed help. I needed someone to call me out when I went too far. Or got lost. Someone who had seen more of the world than I had. Thinking of it like that made it much easier to look deep into the old general's eyes and say, "It would be an honor, teacher." Iroh nodded. Then it would be an honor as well. However, I am not going to teach you about bending. Correct your form, maybe. Spar with you, of course. But it is my belief that bending is personal. I can show you the path, but you will have to walk it alone. I gave a curt nod. In fact, I agreed wholeheartedly. Somehow it felt like a step-by-step process of, do this, do that would be detrimental to my practice instead of him just correcting my form or sparring with me. But that brought up the question of what he would be teaching me then. I stared at him in interest. Then, permit me to ask, teacher, what will you actually teach me? I questioned. Instead of telling me, Iroh waved his hands, the limb left echoes and orange afterimages in the air, along its paths. My eyes widened as he seemed to blend into space. The flow. A spiritual resonance with the consciousness of the world. That way you will increase your comprehension while cleansing your spirit. It only took a second for him to not feel out of place with the rocks, mist, or clouds in the air dimension. Whatever skill he was using allowed him to become a part of the essence of the world. He cut off the effects of the ability suddenly. Focus. That will be for another time. I still need to understand your world better to get a perspective on how I should teach you. Some of my instructions might not be effective here. He stated. I was highly doubtful of that because I knew, in the case of morals and values, the two worlds were not all that different. However, just before I could assure him of the same, I stopped. In actuality, this presented the perfect opportunity to kill two birds with one stone. You see, I had a backlog of shit to do. Most of which were things I wasn't sure I needed Iroh to see or know about. It was smart to always have a backup plan. Chief of those delayed things was the stalled upgrade of my realm. Secondary was trying to figure out a way to help Match. He had been in a pod for most of his life and used as weapon. I needed to help him. To that effect, it would be better if Iroh wasn't present as I took care of that business and a few other things. All right. I could open a portal in Washington near the Library of Congress. I don't know if getting in will be viable for you without an I.D. or if they even ask for one, but it is the biggest public library in the U.S. I mused. Iroh seemed interested in the proposal. You can learn a lot about the geography, history, and the general political principles as well as the day-to-day life and struggles of the common American person. He thought it over and agreed. That would be appreciated. Awesome! I said, a little too excited. I wonder what Ira would make of the internet. Oh boy. But you will need a change of clothes, teacher. I don't know if you noticed, but I motioned to his clothes and then mine. What is wrong with my robes? He asked in confusion. Nothing really. But it's very distinct. The style matches feudal Japanese culture. It's a country in the northern and eastern hemisphere of the planet. You will stand out too much. And for the time being, we should try to avoid that. At least until I find a way to set you up with an identity. I explained. We discussed a few more things of note until we had a clear plan on how to go about things. The question of where he would rest and live was also decided on. Iro cited the fact that if humans were the same as the ones in his world, then pollution had heavily scarred nature, staining its essence. So he was content to remain in the elemental dimension where the essence of the world was still fresh and clean. Breathe in. Sink your mind into a non-dominant state. A state of relief. A state of vulnerability. I listened to his voice and did as he said. We had finally begun, and it was hard. The mind is not designed to not think. The good thing was that he was not telling me to not think. He was telling me to open myself up. To let the tightly locked walls down. To let go and leave myself exposed. Breathe out. Feel your worries and stress wash away with the tidal wave of thoughts. I had meditated before. It wasn't anything new to me, yet this felt different. The world bars no doors. It is welcoming to all, even those who seek to do it harm. In this mental state, your spirit attunement vibrates at the same frequency as the chi in the air. And so, the world opens up to you. My spirit rose up and just like he said, I could see. No, not see, sight was inconsequential, I could perceive. That is the right way to use spirit attunement. Not to see or hear but to perceive through the world. To sense through your core. I sank into a trance. My spiritual attunement sustained through the world essence itself. And in that state I could feel something. A fleeting moment. Different from the flying bisons populating the peaks of mountains that were covered in clouds and mists. I searched for that feeling and felt it again. This time in the opposite direction of where I had initially had it. My spirit spread out, trying to valiantly hold onto that feeling. Do not strain yourself. Use the world as a medium. Once you open yourself up to it, it becomes an extension of you. Iroha's voice cut through my concentration, making me fall back. He was right. I couldn't force this. I breathed in and eased myself into the gentle sway of the world. The feeling grew bigger and more prominent, evolving from just a feeling to a presence. Yet, I did not pursue it. I did not try to pull on it. All I did was feel and perceive. And then I felt a childish giggle echo out through the mountains, followed by Iroha's boisterous laughter. Hello, little one. You are a mischievous one, aren't you? He asked. I opened my eyes with a smile on my face. Fleeting about my face, blowing raspberries towards Iroha was a small wisp of light. Glowing dust fell down where she flew. She had the size of Tinkerbell, but I knew that that was deceptive. Her real shape was a huge cloud that took up space in the whole sky of the air dimension. She could also change her shape into anything. She saw me watching her and fleeted about happily before landing on my outstretched palm. Hello, breeze. I greeted, a link forming between us. Hello! A precocious small voice sounded out. Chapter 128, Introductions. Aden's P.O.V. I concentrated on the link I had established with all three of my spirits. Come. I requested. According to Iroha, a spirit embodying a concept, or in this case element, usually would not leave its abode. Meaning Hakai and Seze could not leave the fire dimension, and similarly, Breeze could not go out of the air dimension. The key word being usually. Iroha speculated that due to my unique position and circumstances as the Lord of the Realm, I could in a sense, allow it. So after meeting Breeze, I decided to try it out while on Sanctuary to see if they could use our link to access the main dimension, the energy plane. There was a slight shimmer in the air and a brief energy pop before a slight breeze ruffled my hoodie and surrounded me. I chuckled a little as the air started carrying me in the air. I looked down and saw a smiling Iroh staring up. The breeze was gentle and it was a novel experience. Usually I had to use my will to nudge the air to carry me. To be honest though, floating as I was, I realized that it wasn't all that different from when I was flying by myself. The strain had considerably lessened ever since I'd become a Grand Master. Two more presences made themselves known as Hawkeye and Sazay flew beside me. They danced in glee, winding over my form in graceful twists and turns. Breeze suddenly sped me up. "Whoa!" I said, a little surprised as she moved me in a similar pattern to the Dragon Twins. I realized that she was copying them. And to be sure, I felt the feeling of shock and surprise which soon gave way to giddy excitement as she realized she wasn't the only spirit around. I shared those feelings with Hawkeye and Sazay, linking all of us together. "Hawkeye, Sazay meet Breeze," I said through the link, sending an image and impression of a little girl who turned into an adorable cloud to them. I felt a wave of elation from Hawkeye and shy acceptance from Sazay. "Breeze, meet your brother and sister, Sazay and Hawkeye," I told the precocious bundle of free energy that was Breeze. Her feelings were of unbridled joy with undertones of excitement. "Breeze, friend? Family?" Hawkeye wondered, making me open my eyes in surprise as we landed. That was the first time she had said more than one word. "Yes. Yes. Yes." I landed a bit unsteadily as Breeze lost control in her excitement, chanting yes several times in a row. The twins flew down and above Iroh and I, in circles before swooping down and snuggling with me. I chuckled a little, rubbing their scales. Iroh gave me a nod from where he stood. I nodded back and stepped away from the twins. Hawkeye cocked her head in question. I merely smiled and turned my attention to the link. "Breeze, you can materialize now," I told my air spirit who was suddenly very shy. "Come on." "No." I rolled my eyes at the sudden change in behavior. "Come out or else you're going to miss out on all of the fun. Tell you what, you guys can play all you want." I enticed her. "Play." I chuckled as a draft of air suddenly materialized into the shape of a little fairy. She was dressed in a light green dress that reached to her knees, had on a funny little helmet made in the shape of a flying bison head with the horns shooting straight to the sky and the arrow glowing green atop the white helmet. Her hair was a lime green, with green eyes and a cute face and sharp little fangs. This seemed to be her favorite form. She darted to my neck and hid from Hawkeye and Sazay, peeking from the side of my neck. I sighed and lifted her by her little dress, dropping her on my palm. "Hawkeye, Sazay, this is Breeze, she's an air spirit." 2 minutes later, Iroh and I were watching as the spirits flew above the sky, playing. It hadn't taken too long for them to become fast friends. Now that you can allow them access to the main dimension, it figures that they can even follow you out to the real world. Iroh observed. I shook my head. "I'm not taking them outside with me. I can't. They're not ready for that just yet. If ever." I replied, feeling the critical look he gave me before nodding and staring at the 3 innocent spirits. "Good," he approved. Later. The boom tube opened up to my room. I walked through and threw myself on the bed. I frowned as my back landed on something. Just then, my phone started chiming with a few missed calls, some app notifications, and a text from Maze. I swiped the screen and at the back of my mind, marveled as I usually did at just how advanced the tech of this world was. The Wayne phone I had was easy to use, had no lag, and its slim design put my original world smartphone to shame. I opened the text and read it. "Maze, sup kid, Lucy and I will be gone for a few days. We got something to take care of. I left you some cash on your bed, and if you need anything, talk to the staff. Nobody wants you to burn the whole building down because you tried to cook. Later. Maze, Hey kid, if a dude dressed in a long black cloak, with white eyes appears, telling you to go with him, yeah, forget anything you were taught about strangers and just follow along, it's kinda important. Think of it as your next mission. Maze, Lucy says, don't touch my jazz records or I'll curse your descendants for all eternity. I frowned at the second message and scoffed at the last. As if I'd bring harm to the true flavor of African American music. Jazz is an inspiration. See, and old people say this Gen X are so uneducated in the ways of life. Looking at you, Dad. I sighed and cut off my useless train of thought. I reached underneath me and pulled out a stack of dollar bills. Just $1,000. Huh, speaking of which, Maze nor Lucy had ever so blatantly given me money, they must have thought they would be gone for some time. I wonder if it's to do with her second cryptic text. A stranger with a long black cloak and white eyes, huh? Sounds familiar. Oh well, if it happens, I guess. I rose up and wobbled on my feet. Exhaustion hit me like a ton of bricks. My body was relatively untired, just sleepy, and the fact that I had been active for the past 24 hours just compounded it. I had already taken a shower back in the sanctuary, so I dug into my sheets and slept like a log. The next day saw me get some donuts and a cup of coffee to go for my guest back in the elemental dimension. I had been wary of getting Iroh tea, thinking he would probably hate it due to the kind he was used to. The boom tube opened in the alley behind the coffee shop. I waved at the homeless dude who looked as if he'd seen a ghost, throwing him a 5 controlled by the air, before plunging in. So apparently, Iroh's version of sleep is meditation. The twins and Breeze were nowhere to be seen though, and using our links, I could feel that they were back to their dimensions. Of course, I had permanently given them access to the main dimension. Breeze had particularly enjoyed whizzing past the island and animals in the main dimension because the only creatures in the airplane were flying bisons. For her it was more friends to play with. I set the coffee and donuts to the side, using my Realm Master status to maintain a small field of heat around them to make sure they remained at an optimal temperature, and then I started meditating too. I did as Iroh had instructed me, taking deep breaths and releasing them while opening myself up to the essence of the world. I had no idea how much time had passed, but when I opened my eyes later, it was to the side of the box of donuts lying to the side, empty while the coffee looked untouched. I raised an eyebrow at my master. "Teacher, how did you get the tea set here?" I asked, pointing to the small black table with a familiar kettle and 2 cups placed on it. Did he have a hammer space like I did? A magician never reveals his tricks. He told me and winked. I snorted at the cliché saying. Anyway, not a fan of coffee, huh? He made a face. No. Too bitter. I slapped myself on the forehead. But the tea you make is even more so. No, tea refreshes the mind, my young student. He said in a profound and serious tone. Plus, all the cool old people like it. He added, ruining the atmosphere. Did you at least like the donuts? I asked, already knowing the answer. Iroh scratched his beard. So that is what they're called? I wish to have more of these donuts. I found them very tasty. I smiled. Good. But trust me, you have a lot more to try if you think donuts are tasty. We'll see if you won't change your tune once you dip fries in a milkshake. Absolute heaven. We idly chatted until Iroh told me to show him my other skills apart from bending. I demonstrated my chi blocking skills, going further to show him the air variation, called Dragon Fist, a skill that had not seen much use, my expert hand-to-hand combat that I'd learned from Black Canary, and my skill with a blade that I had taught myself from inspiration gotten from different media and tutorial videos. Iroh had been shocked at how I wasn't dead yet. He called my chi blocking skills adequate, my hand-to-hand combat subpar, at least I could throw a punch, and my blade skills were criminal and an affront to masters like Piandao and Sokka. I was suitably shocked. He then went further to explain the only reason I hadn't gotten my ass kicked was because I was very good at mixing what I had. While fighting, I always had air sense, energy sense, and recently spirit attunement activated for me to sense the battlefield. I leveraged my strength and speed to hit as hard and fast as I could, and I fell back when I was outmatched and relied on my elements for quick and damaging attacks. He dissected my fighting style within seconds. Unfortunately, Iroh told me that he couldn't teach me anything worthwhile in terms of unarmed combat or weapon skills. He wasn't a true master in any of those, and frankly my strong body ensured that I wouldn't learn anything substantial and just fall to punching or kicking as hard as I could. Fortunately, I knew where I could learn all that. It came with some risk in the case of one of those ways, but I was confident I could make it work. But Iroh's good news was that he would help me to seamlessly blend the abilities of my spirits with my sword whenever they combined. After coming up with a rough plan of what we would do for my spirit training, I opened a boom tube and we left for Washington. The last time I had been here was when I'd first been introduced to the sidekicks. Chapter 129, A Thinly Veiled Threat. General P.O.V. The room was populated by only 4 people. In a move contrary to their usual arrangement, apart from their monthly mandatory meeting, Luthor had gathered the other members of the Light barring a few. 1. Savage, as he was placed in a stabilizing pod, a medical device that prolonged a patient's life through a continuous injection of revitalizing drugs. Offshoots from the numerous tests done on Cobra Venom, Blockbuster, Mirakuru, and other variants of the biological enhancing super drugs. The other missing party was Ocean's Master, who was derailed by a mission. Said mission was access to Con-El, the Superboy, to try and secretly acquire a blood sample as a backup in case Luthor's plan didn't bear any fruit. The last was Clarion, who was terrorizing the trench. The only expendable target the Light could hope to lose. He was the subject matter along with a few more things. Apart from those 3, everyone else was in attendance. They were all being hosted by Queen Bee at a heavily guarded mansion complete with wards and magical blocks courtesy of the best magicians money or power could afford. The normal security was not to joke with, either. Top-of-the-line military-grade weapons with agents trained to be the best, high-end cameras from LexCorp, the shit that would make any paranoid tech billionaire cream their pants at the specs, heat and motion sensors that had incredible ranges, an aerial detection system that could detect an object as small as a mockingbird from hundreds of miles away, and to top it all off, an AI system that was complex enough to sift and process through all that data from the radar. This mansion was more secure than Fort Knox and the White House. Lex would know, he had the government contracts after all. In the lavish room, adorned with expensive carpets, drapes, and furniture, the group sat around a table. Lex was at the head, with Queen Bee at his immediate left, then Ra's al Ghul at his right, followed by Brain, who was seated the furthest from him. I do not see the importance to news for country like this, Monsieur Luthor. It's valuable time I could be carrying out my research, comprendre, no? The Brain said in a French accent. He is not wrong. I find myself losing faith due to our recent failures. It does not reflect well on what the shadows represent. Roz spoke up. Normally he would be content to sit and listen, being a man of words only when he felt the need. Luthor nodded and turned to Queen Bee, patiently waiting for her to say her own piece. Queen Bee narrowed her eyes. Luthor had been expecting their dissatisfaction and was prepared. It wasn't a surprise he was letting them air out their grievances. We have not achieved some of our objectives. Either stalled due to recent developments, she said, subtly referring to Savage's incarceration, or the need to lay low due to Clarion acting as a loose cannon. 2 problems that were intimately linked. Luthor clasped his hands onto the table, ready to speak now that the rest had said what they had to say. The familiar charisma was put on display as he smoothly adjusted his cufflinks. The power balance has dramatically shifted. And not in our favor, he acknowledged. Fortunately, it does not seem to be on the hero's side as well. They too have lost just as much, if not more, than we have. But how does that help with our current difficulties? Ra's al Ghul posited. I was getting there, Luthor replied. The Light's mission has been one of intellectual progression, meaning we see what others of regular disposition fail to. We track the trends and stack the cards in our favor. We plan and we succeed. He smiled, leaning in. Think of it this way, almost everything we have come up with has worked. What hasn't has taught us, we have learned from it and have not repeated the same mistake twice. This, funk is not the end. No. I'd like to think of it as the new beginning. Luthor's smile was wide. You're parlant, but I'm not hearing any solutions, just reassurances. We need to address the elephant, or rather the Mort Rouge, wreaking havoc in the underwater kingdoms. It's not our way to waste resources, and the trench would make for viable expendable test subjects. The brain commented. I would also like to address the Chaos Lord's current behavior. Queen Bee seconded. Instead of speaking, Luthor smirked as he held out his hand to the side. Mercy handed him a LexCorp pad. He tapped a few keys and then a red light was spewed from the pads and device projector. The holographic visual feed wavered for a few seconds before stabilizing into a clip that began playing. A video showing Vandal Savage, dressed in his regal outfit with hands clasped behind his back. His face showed the same impassive expression. The face and eyes of a man who had seen it all, that few things ever surprised him anymore. The face of a man with a grand goal. Everyone in the room stared intently at the video. If you're seeing this, then I assume two things have happened. Two things that are related more than you realize. I am either dead, which is highly unlikely, or currently indisposed due to a rather unfortunate meeting with a past enemy, and because of this, Clarion is off his leash. This spells more danger for the world than you can understand. He closed his eyes as if recalling a past incident. Let me get two things out of the way. Project Rebirth will work. Whatever doubts and weakening resolve towards our mission you harbor, get rid of them. And the second thing is, you cannot control Clarion, merely point him towards a target and lead him to his devices. The Trench are fast breeders, that should give you enough time to enact Project Rebirth. I estimate 2 months before he grows tired. If I am not around by then, the world will shake to its core. The clip shimmered before disappearing as the video ended. Queen Bee slammed her hands on the table and got up. That was a thinly veiled threat. She understood, as did everyone, that Savage was giving them an ultimatum to ensure that they did not decide unanimously to do away with him. Roz looked at Luthor calmly. In fact, he had come here with the proposal to do just that. Then the plan had been to seize control of the light's numerous resources to efficient the Shadow's involvement with the world. Luthor looked at him through the corner of his eye, and a conversation happened between the two that went unnoticed by the affronted Queen Bee and the thoughtful Brain. Roz decided that he had lost this round and acquiesced to Luthor with a small nod. Let me guess, Monsieur Luthor, Clarion's next targets after the 2-month deadline is over are Metropolis, the portion of the Middle East spanning Bialia. Queen Bee grew incensed at that, grinding her teeth as she felt anger that threatened to consume her psyche. The Brain continued, heedless or disregarding the leader of Bialia's fury. Atlantis, Infinity Island, and my own small piece of the gâteau, France. Luthor gave a curt nod. Well played, Monsieur Savage. Well played indeed. Luthor adjusted his tie, the small smile slipping off his face as he turned serious. For Project Rebirth to go off without a hitch, we need to get Superman all alone. The Justice League will be currently occupied with mitigating Clarion's endeavors. Wary of his chaos-fueled actions leaking out into the other underwater states. He is under compelling instructions not to let them see him. We cannot let the League know that we're the ones behind this, because they will have their guard up. I will lure Superman away by using a unique frequency only Kryptonians can hear, and then let Lobo do the rest. Their samples will be a major help not only for Project Rebirth but also for Project Godblood. Are we on the same page? They didn't like it, but they ended up nodding along. The good thing about all this is that you can renegotiate your initial demands with him. Say what you will about Vandal, he might be a bastard, but he is a fair one. Luthor said in an uncharacteristically snarl. Queen Bee smirked inwardly. Seems like Lex was also mad at the position he had been forced in. If Project Rebirth failed, Metropolis was done for. The only one who could control the Chaos Lord was in a coma after all. General P.O.V. Lex was back in Metropolis. He stood on a balcony looking out into the city with a glass of wine in his hands. The earlier easy smile was nowhere to be seen. None of them seemed concerned. A figure like Savage is not someone to trifle with. To push him to the lengths the immortal has gone to, I assess the threat of this enemy of his is more than the others can handle knowing of. A clear voice sounded out from inside the room. Roz was seated on the lone couch with a wide view of the room, a tendency he had normalized to be prepared for any attack. His left leg was crossed over his right and a similar wine glass was in his right hand. Lex scoffed. They cannot begin to comprehend how dangerous these times are. Yet danger comes with its own share of opportunities. Luthor went silent and then made a name drop to answer Roz's question. Lucifer. The distinct sound of glass shattering from behind him made him frown even more. Aiden's P.O.V. So apparently, Iroh hated suits. Yeah, I was surprised and also not. He said the outfit was too constricting to his movements. I mean, I understand, he's from a martial arts heavy world. But come on, if not suits then what other formal wear could he go for? Then he surprised me by selecting jeans, a pair of sneakers, a gray jacket and a black t-shirt. I was gobsmacked. I couldn't reconcile the robe-wearing master with this hunk that was leading the women in the store, flushed in desire. And yes, one look at him and his nice attitude and the girl who was helping us out gave him her number. What the hell? Anyway, I paid and we left for the library. Getting him was not as big a problem as I thought. Iroh got his bearings real quick, most definitely used to places like these. He looked to be in his element, going straight for the history books. I left him to his devices after explaining how to use a phone to contact me and got back to the elemental dimension. I stood before the Skoniad Tower, looking inside at Pod that was running tests and trying to come up with a way to fix Match. There was an option I wanted to see if it could work for him. I dived into the link I had with my spirits. Says hey buddy. I need your help. Chapter 130, The Directives. Aiden's P.O.V. It took a second for a reply to come. Okay. The air shimmered beside me and with a pop, Sazae's familiar form flew out, winding through the air happily before coming to a stop beside me, curiously looking at the Skoniad Tower before us. The whole structure had grown larger, yet more compact and streamlined. It had lost its intimidating look and added a few more container-like buildings attached to its foundation. I rubbed Sazae's shiny green scales, something that both twins loved immensely. Where are the girls? I asked him and he snorted out a plume of flame, a bit annoyed. Then he sent me an image of them trying to prank a herd of hippo cows in one of the animal-populated islands across the main dimension. The fact that they dragged him along on their escapades did not amuse him. I laughed as I got the sense I'd done him a favor by inviting him over. Of course that earned me a plume of fire to my face. Sorry boy, I know it must get a little lonely being the only male spirit around. I told him only for him to cock his head to the side as if he was looking at an idiot. Then he sent me an image of Iroh and I had to agree that he was technically right. Iroh is more of a guest. He's not a native. He's not from here. I explained only to open up the line for more questions. Then, where is he from? And where is here? I was shocked. That was a clear and concise question when a day ago, they mostly talked in one-word statements. They were growing smarter, it would seem. Maybe they benefited greatly from our link than I initially thought? I delved into the links and felt the bonds between all four of us were stronger somehow. More concrete. Sazae nudged me with his snout, pulling me out of my thoughts. Oh, sorry about that, buddy. Spaced out for a second. I cleared my throat and waved a hand to indicate the surroundings. This is home. Home can have many meanings. It can mean a place that gives you comfort and rest, away from everything else. It can mean a place that is filled with people you care about. Like Hawkeye, Breeze, Iroh, and I. A family. It can also mean a place that you've grown up in. A place that is intimately familiar to you. A place that you fight with everything you got to protect. I paused to gauge his reaction, and I could see him mulling over my words. I had done the best I could to explain, but most of those concepts probably went over his head. They were smart, yes, but also young. Home is family and friends? He tentatively asked me, and I nodded with a smile, sending him positive feelings. Home is warm, he said in a more confident tone, sending me an image of the fire dimension. Mind you, all this was happening in a mental space. Home is family and friends and warmth, he concluded. I smiled and rubbed his snout. Good, you're getting it, says A. And I was wondering if you could help me add another friend to our family. I told him, showing him an image of Match sleeping in a pod. Says A went silent for a few seconds, turning his attention from me to the tower. Specifically, the pod housing the Supervillain. Haha, I suck at names sometimes. Fine, all the time. Anyway, I could feel his intrigue and cautious interest. Says A, and the rest had only interacted with two people. Iroh and I. The former was more spirit than a person, but you get the point. So the possibility of interacting with someone else must have been a very exciting prospect to the quiet dragon. Come. Let's get closer, I told him, and walked towards the energy boundary. A slight tingle went through my body as I passed, says A, following behind me once I utilized my Realm Master status to allow it. I placed a palm on the wall of the structure, intimately connecting with its functions, and the pod rose up from the ground and floated towards me. I stepped up to it and studied its build and the patient within. Match looked to be at peace. The snarling features portraying a huge anger were subdued. His solar suit had marks on it and was torn in some places, probably due to his fight with Terror, but the skin underneath looked unblemished. Tower, give me a status update on the primary directive, the secondary and the third in that order, please. I ordered, knowing the basic and rudimentary AI system would recognize my speech pattern and orders. A second later there was a text box. Affirmative. There was a hum and a pulse, before an holographic visual image of Match appeared before us. Primary directive, stabilizing the D.N.A of subject 001 Match is pending at 49% due to a lack of resources and sufficient data. I read out loud the next display box from the realm that had appeared before my eyes. The tower could communicate with me through the system. It wasn't the first time, and with Saze being not the reading type, I saw no need to publicize the information on Match's current condition. I waved the text box away. A lack of enough data and resources, huh? Well, now I'm unsure if Saze can help him. Open the pod. I gave the command, and with a hiss, the pod opened up. Match's eyes opened wide, and it only took a split second for the anger to come back. Nope. None of that. I'm not going to get into a punching match with you. No pun intended. I used my still steadily growing mental abilities to mind blast him a little. A skill that was useless against someone with normal mental faculties. In fact, I figured that teens would only experience a slight pressure to the cranium, with the mind blast having zero effect on adults. I said, steadily growing, you don't become a Martian-level telepath overnight. Oh wow, it's only been a few months. Who said adaptive physiology was weak again? Oh yeah, me. Anyway, Match froze for a second before swaying on his feet and falling to his knees, disoriented. I looked at the scene with regret and anger. Dude had been used as a fucking disposable weapon by Luthor and the Light. It's not fair. I walked closer to him and took a knee before him as well. His body tensed, but he otherwise remained calm, the mental suggestions and positive feelings of reassurance I was sending him being the only thing stopping him from spearing my chest with his fist. I rubbed my forehead as I felt his anger buckle against my interference. The prominent feeling he had was red rage. It's a wonder how a red ring hadn't found him yet. It felt all-consuming and was centered around an image deep in his subconscious. A familiar image of a shield symbol with an S. It was cracked though, but surrounding it was blood-red chains to keep it from shattering completely and to keep it chained to an ideal. I frowned in disgust. The Light had messed up with this. The programming and indoctrination was shoddy. but also something I was not capable of currently. To put it in perspective, they had basically given Match two scenarios: if Superman strays from the ideal, kill him. If Superman dies, replace him. That was it. That was his whole psyche. The motive, the principle, the plan, the interest. Match was chained to that symbol, and I don't know if it was a subconscious recognition of the symbol of the House of L being to blame or if it was a Cadmus programming to stoke his actions, but he both hated and loved that symbol. Luthor, pray to God, I don't decide to come for you and your merry band of psychos. I sighed, gently squeezing his shoulder. I smiled, looking at Match with a critical eye. I was a firm believer of active justice. In this scenario, Match should be the one to enact his own revenge on Luthor. You might not understand me right now, but I promise you, for discarding your worth to the side, I will give you the chance to exact your revenge. I stood up. Saze, could you use your fire to try and stabilize his genity? I stopped once I felt the small dragon's confusion. I rubbed his snout. Sorry, I mean, could you try to heal any damage he has? I requested, and this time he understood and nodded. Saze floated nearer to Match and flew around him in circles. He was really excited to get to know someone new. I couldn't find it in me to tell him that Match was not in the right headspace to make friends. Tower, scan and record the process. I ordered, and the tower answered back with a pulse of recognition. Saze opened his mouth and breathed out gentle white flames. I kept on holding back the anger seeking to consume Match's mind as his body was lifted to the sky by the gentle licks of the white flames. They covered his body and seemed to seep deep into him. I felt my heart hammer in my chest as the minutes ticked by. Then, the fire started to die down as Match's body floated back down to the ground. Saze looked at me in sadness. The task was way out of his capabilities. I sighed and rubbed his scales while sending feelings of understanding and happiness for trying. It's okay, buddy. I'm not disappointed. I told him, and while he was still in a bad mood, he understood that I'd known it would be a long shot anyway. Scan complete. New information up for review. A text box from the tower appeared, making me smile. Well, seems like Saze's efforts were not for naught. Go on. I ordered, and a new display box replaced the earlier one. There is an approximate 89.65292843358974689% chance of D.N.A stabilization if an in-depth study of the D.N.A from the original donor is conducted. Oh, well. It's official, this goddamn tower wants me to go the villain route. How the fuck am I supposed to get Superman's D.N.A without him noticing? He had like a dozen senses that would detect me from a mile away. Okay, maybe I'm exaggerating a little. But still, although I had promised to help Match in any way possible, that did not mean I was going to crash with Supes and the Justice League head-on. No sir. This time, it would be a serious battle, and despite some of them pissing the shit out of me, they were still the good guys and I didn't want to hurt anyone. Tower, what about D.N.A from a sibling or an offspring of the original donor? Would that work? Recalculating. Negative. Oh well. Moving on. Right, give me the status update on the secondary and third directives. Affirmative. Realm upgrade at 1%. Pending. I nodded. I had left it at that because I still needed to get the NDP cleaned of any outside influence and bonded to me. The third? Preliminary scan on device 001 Dub Magitech cuffs at 34%. Pending due to a lack of enough data on unknown energy signature Dub Theta Energy. Preliminary scan on device 002 Dub D.N. Suppressor patches at 36%. Okay, change the designation from Theta Energy to Magic. I ordered, and the tower complied. It was a bit disheartening to know that none of the directives had been completed, but I understood the reason. In my speculation, the biggest reason as to why they were taking so long was a lack of enough data, especially on Magic and most importantly, the low level of the realm. I needed to upgrade it ASAP. Luckily, that was exactly what was next on my agenda. After that was complete, then I'd find out a way to steal Superman's DNA. For now, it was time to pay a visit to Madame Xanadu. Chapter 131, Flying to New Orleans. Hey guys, I'm back. Patreon is at Chapter 248. General P.O.V. Saze dug his snout deeper into Aiden's hand. The teen rubbed the scales on his neck affectionately, right on the spot that Saze liked. Not that he would ever admit it to Hawkeye or Breeze. See you later, buddy. I gotta go take care of something. The foreign thought projection appeared in his mind. The streaks of ideas intermixed with coherent feelings of hope, affection, and a little impatience allowed Saze to understand that the master was leaving. Take me with you. Saze responded, using the link to project his own feelings of loneliness, hope, and excitement. Aiden's face changed to a wince. Saze couldn't understand facial expressions just yet, but he was picking up on cues. The expression on his face did not match any of the feel-good emotions the master usually projected. And as if to prove him true, the master replied with a no. Sorry, Saze, but I can't risk the world tainting any of you. I need you to wait. At least until you're a little bit older, and I promise I'll take you and your sisters to places you've never been before, okay? Saze was indignant but otherwise understood. The master was forgiven after rubbing his scales right on that favorite spot Saze liked, and with a wave of his hand, a portal appeared before Aden that he jumped in. Saze watched him leave before he turned back to look around. He was alone. Maybe he should go back Hawkeye and Breeze? But no, they were too colorful? Yes, colorful for him. Not to say they looked bad or something, but every time Saze spent time with them, he felt himself losing something, manliness. He didn't want to be colorful. He wanted to be not colorful. But not dull either. Saze mulled it over before deciding to give up and admit he had no idea what he wanted. Which left him to explore the deserted island. Saze let out a plume of flame as he snorted. The island itself was barren and dry. It only took a few minutes for him to fly around before returning to where he was. There was really nothing else to do here, huh? He snorted and was about to leave when his eyes caught the figure of the sleeping match. Saze was in need of friends. And Master did say he wanted Match to be a friend and family. Saze flew closer to the pod and used the connection he had made when he was trying to heal Match to try and communicate. His snout touched the glass of the cage, while he used his spiritual abilities to touch upon the soul of the clone. Instantly, Saze found himself in a gray room covered with cracks on its metallic structure. In the middle of the room, a soul that looked like a 6-year-old kid was sleeping down on the hard ground. His form was hazy and shrunk upon itself, wearing a white costume with a House of L symbol on the chest. Not that Saze knew what the symbol stood for. In fact, Saze did not have much of an idea as to what he was about to do, or the repercussions of his actions. The little dragon cocked his head to the side and reached out to the silent and blank-faced child. Hello? His greetings went unanswered. So he flew closer and started floating above the kid in circles. New friend? Saze tried again, only to meet the same blank-faced silence. So he thought as to why his new friend was ignoring him. Maybe he didn't want to play with him because he looked different? Yes. Saze was sure that was the reason. Breeze had changed her form to look like a white dragon to compete and see who could fly faster between her, Hawkeye, and Saze. Saze has enjoyed it. Maybe his new friend would want to play if Saze changed to look like him? Saze concentrated and bent his spirit with minimal effort, something that would have shocked Iroh greatly. And with a pop, he slimmed down, and in his place was a young dark-skinned boy who looked to be 6 years old standing before the sleeping blank-faced clone. The boy shared a lot of similarities with Aden. One could even say it was a clone of him. Saze looked down at himself, holding up his hands and wriggling his fingers. This form was weird. He turned to his new potential friend and lay down next to him, so that they were now staring at each other. Saze's brown eyes made contact with Match's own silver orbs. Hello, Saze said with a smile on his face. Match's eyes gained a spark of intelligence. AdensP.O.V. I really need to travel more. This version of the US was different from my own, with new whole cities, regions, and towns. Meaning that I couldn't just boom tube anywhere I wanted or remembered from my previous world. I'd been to New Orleans before. At least in my version of the Earth, but that didn't count for anything given that this world was, as stated earlier, different. So instead of trying out my luck and boom tubing there, I appeared in Washington, D.C., checked up on Ira real quick, and then flew to the clouds. The distance from Washington, D.C. to New Orleans is about 1,000 miles, give or take. I was going to fly there. Time for a road trip. Plus, it had been a long time since I had tested my full flight speed. Grandmaster in airbending was essentially a cheat code on reality. To be specific, the air itself. I experienced no drag, air friction, or pressure. That raises questions. If there is no friction, does that mean I can accelerate forever? Scary, but also a bit improbable. My powers were not an exact science. The mystical element basically overshadowed any scientific principles I could come up with. To put it in simple terms, the wind basically obeyed and anticipated any of my wishes and hurried to carry them out. My figure oriented itself above the din of the capital city. I tightened my back muscles while turning to face the direction of New Orleans. Here goes nothing, top speed from the get-go. I felt a fast-moving object pull up to my position through my air sense, but paid them no mind. What the fuck was Batman's Batwing doing here? I shook my head as it neared my position and waved at him. Then I blurred and disappeared. General P.O.V. A camera had caught sight of someone who matched Aiden's identity a couple of hours ago in Washington, D.C. Bruce had wanted to make things right. Whether that meant bringing him in or talking to him, he felt the need. So he had made the trip from Gotham to D.C. in hopes of locating Aden. And he had. The boy was not subtle at all. Batman flew the Batwing closer to him, hoping to direct him to the ground where they could talk. But 1 second the boy was there, then the next, the Batwing buckled and flipped as a huge wind pressure exploded out, pushing everything away. Batman hurried to control his aircraft and luckily managed to do so before he could crash. The hull of the Batwing along with the windshield had sustained heavy damage. Batman narrowed his eyes at the direction Aden had taken and started reevaluating his risk factor. Aden was growing stronger. Time to overhaul the initial danger assessment countermeasures and come up with new plans. Aden's P.O.V. I blasted through the air, going at a speed where everything was blurry to me. My eyes flashed with an electric blue as I increased my perception and reaction speed so as to not crash against something. The speeds I was clocking reminded me that airbending was still my most versatile element. I really needed to come up with a new subskill. The theory I had, that it was possible to have multiple for each element, made a lot of sense now that I was more familiar with my powers. And given the fact that Spark of Enlightenment worked once for each element, it meant I had a chance to master another subskill in the air category. What had me stumped was, what subskill should I go for? I thought about it as I enjoyed the sights. Now that I could at least see where I was going, the trip turned out to be awesome but very short. I reached the skyline above New Orleans in seemingly no time. Further on in the distance, a blue stretch of water told me I had arrived close to the coast. I looked at the time on the minimized display box at the corner of my eyes and blinked again. Is this real? I muttered. 52 seconds? The mutter turned into a sharp whisper. That's like 70,000 miles per hour. Or Mach 100 more or less. Jesus, that's fast for flight speed. But still, nowhere close to the speed people like the Flash or Superman could reach. Oh wow, that put things in perspective. I shook my head and flew down. Yes, there was a risk to people seeing me, but what was I going to do? Shield myself by taking a principle of air, applying it to my form to turn invisible? I paused in place. Holy shit! Was it that easy? It couldn't, right? I mean, that was more of a light bending thing, right? Then again, the subskills I had access to were not as clear-cut as one might think. I mean, water could heal, where's the science in that? In canon, airbenders could spirit bend or something akin to spirituality. I didn't know. I was mostly into utility. Well, there is no reason not to try at least. Trying never hurt anyone. My heart hammered inside me as I thought it over. Air is not visible because it sends very little light to our eyes. It's a transparent medium, meaning its emittance and reflectance is zero, meaning it transmits all the light. Gah! Thinking of it like that, there was no way it was going to work. The guideline mechanics were not backed by logic. So I tried again, this time doing away with the physics viewpoint and instead tried to adopt the feature itself onto my person. To blend in. The element had shown how much it favored me. You can't explain that away with science. So I took a deep breath and just did it. It was like something just clicked and I felt, melted into the fabric of space itself. I don't know what I did. I couldn't really understand it. But that was a turning point for me and my understanding of how my abilities worked. As I flew down, invisible to the naked eye while landing on an alley, I wondered how much remained undiscovered about the enigma that is my powers. I pulled up my display box in anticipation to see the description of my new subskill and frowned. That's weird. There was nothing. And given that the system never lags, maybe invisibility didn't really count as a subskill. Just like how wind constructs were just a facet of my wind control. That's a bummer. I killed the disappointment off quickly as I got back on track. I knew Madame Xanadu had a fortune-telling gig somewhere in the city. The question is where? Where the heck am I going to find Nimue? General P.O.V. What went unseen and unnoticed by Aden was the golden glow that the air element tab briefly pulsed with before the display box was neatly minimized to the corner of his eyes. Chapter 132, Madame Xanadu. General P.O.V. For eons, a structure has remained in place. A clear distinction between the powers that govern, the powers that rule and the power that was, is, and will always be. An authority that is totalitarian, supreme and sovereign. My fate was not meant to be chosen nor my destiny a path that I selfishly carved. I never wanted this. And for a long time, resentment was my penance. But then, I found a purpose in existence. A purpose I have selfishly held onto for billions of years. A purpose to rebel against the shackles binding my being to a premise with no concrete evidence or inference. This time I did not raise up arms for a direct confrontation because the result was already apparent. He is the one true being for a reason. Power is something which he does not lack and a stalemate was the one thing I could hope for. So I chose a different method. One born from his selfless gift to mankind. I could not choose my purpose, but I could choose how I went about the purpose thrust upon me. To preside over the infinite realms of the damned. Hell to mortals, home to demons and those unwanted. They expected an iron hand. A king who had submerged himself into his role as the god of the accursed and nefarious beings exempt from the light. But, I went on a different path. One of an overseer. Barely there. Content to watch the princes fight for power like ravenous creatures. Content to watch as three of you took it upon yourself to rule instead of answer. Content to watch as more and more of those lower ranked grew cocky, forgetting who each one of you is subject to. And now, that will end. You have committed one terrible deed. I was enjoying my time and you in your infinite stupidity decided that no, I can't have some bloody fun. It's not anything unexpected really. In fact, this was long overdue. And so unto thee believing thyself safe from my power, the devil pays back all favors owed, 1,000-fold. Johnson Space Center, Houston, Texas, a few hours ago. What is so urgent, you had to wake me up at 2 a.m. A grouchy middle-aged man dressed in a clean-cut tuxedo said barging into the surveillance and control hub followed closely by a P.A carrying a steaming cup of coffee. The bodyguards that had been part of his retinue took up position outside the room looking mean as fuck. Ah, sorry sir. A meek-looking woman started only to be rudely interrupted by the deputy director of NASA. Save it, Walkins. Someone tell me what the fuck is going on. Now. Photometric images from Vista 002 has just revealed to us some shocking news, sir. One of the tech guys answered while pulling up images from an interplanetary space probe deep in the Kuiper Belt. Vista 002, huh? That is the probe resulting in our contract with LexCorp. It's supposed to be the best of the best. The deputy director commented, curiously looking at the screen. The feed showed asteroids dominating that part of the solar system, along with a bigger chunk of rock that was relatively spherical when compared to the rest of the things floating about in space. Then, a second later, the whole thing blew apart. Chunks of the dwarf planet exploded out in a cinematic fashion before something destabilized the flight trajectory of the probe and it lost the signal. Approximately 5 hours ago, Pluto exploded, sir. Aden's P.O.V. So, I can be absent-minded sometimes. I had just spent more than half an hour walking around the city before facepalming at my stupidity. I could simply use my energy sense, coupled with flight, invisible of course, to locate magical signatures. Madame Xanadu was supposedly very strong. There was no way I couldn't feel that pulse of power if she didn't deliberately cloak her magical power. And I think doing so would be bad for business. I used my new invisibility to conceal myself as I flew above the city. A few laps around notable locations such as the Old French Quarter and I picked up on something. I flew down and landed on an alley. A flying superhero's best friend. Alleys are awesome, except when they're Gotham alleys, then they turn, dangerous is putting it lightly. I shook my head and rounded up on the corner, dispelling the invisibility around my body. Now that I was on the ground, my energy sense was bombarded by the buzzing energy of the city. New Orleans was mystically active in proportions that were shocking. Los Angeles didn't feel like this. Might be multiple ley lines going through the city. I mused. Which would also be highly likely given that Madame Xanadu had taken up residence in this particular city. The crowds in the streets were filled with colorful performers and tasty-looking street food. I had to remind myself that I had a task I needed to do before I could get distracted. It didn't take long to find Madame Xanadu's fortune-telling shop. Given the fact that her name was plastered above the entrance, she wasn't trying too hard to hide either. I hesitated for only a second before pushing open the door. The bell placed above the door announced my presence as I walked through the building. Instantly, I was assaulted by a myriad of different scents through my energy sense. Something that disoriented me enough that I staggered in place, grabbing onto a chair in the empty room. My air sense spread out to source for who might have been the cause only to come up empty. TSK. You should shut off your magical senses. Madame Xanadu is a regular host for many mystical practitioners and beings. What you are sensing is their different mystical signatures. I did as the female voice said and shut off energy sense. The strain ended abruptly, leaving behind echoes that were easing up by the second. I rubbed my forehead as a headache started building up though. What can Madame Xanadu do for you, young man? The female voice from earlier stated again and I felt like slapping myself for my rudeness. Oh, I apologize. I replied, looking up, only to be met by a shockingly beautiful woman with olive skin and a glow in her green eyes. She was dressed in a colorful red and black dress, her forehead adorned with 3 light green diamonds. The one in the middle bigger than the ones on the sides. And lastly she had on a choker with a crest that showed the sun and a crescent moon. What grabbed my attention more than anything else was what I was feeling through my spirit attunement. His soul was strong. Like really strong. This showed that Nimi was very old. Which wasn't that surprising given that she was there during Merlin's time. I might have to start charging you extra for staring. Madame Xanadu teased, reminding me I'd been silent for close to a minute now. But damn, I could watch her for hours and not get tired. Seriously, is it a rule that any relevant character had to be absurdly beautiful? First Wonder Woman, Maze, Canary, and now her. Granted, I might have a thing for older women so, it could be bias. Her voice was also heavily accented and sort of throaty. I'm Aden Strong. I regained control of myself and said steadily, reaching out with my hand to shake hers. She smiled and reciprocated. Her palm was calloused and warm, buzzing with energy. I raised up my eyebrows as the budding headache seemed to disappear upon the touch. "Thanks," I told her, pulling my hand back. She waved me off. "Think nothing of it. Now, what can Madame Xanadu do for you?" "I do fortune-telling, but something tells me that's not what you're here for." I chuckled. "Yeah, fortune-telling is not really my thing. I believe in going about life with as little spoilers as possible. It's more exciting that way." "Liar," I said to myself even as I answered. The reason I didn't want her to read my future, however, was because of what Lucifer had told me. Lucy, the second strongest being in the universe, had stated himself that he could not foresee my future. It stands to reason that Xanadu, despite her undeniable skills in fortune-telling, would similarly not see anything. That might label me as a person of interest, and with her admittance that she dealt with multiple mystical practitioners, I did not want that info to go public or in the wrong hands. Being unique more often than not brings trouble. H. Nimue hummed skeptically, reaching into her lap and placing a deck of tarot cards on the table between us. "If it's not fortune-telling you're after, then what can I do for you?" she questioned. I reached into my pocket and secretly accessed the hammer space. Pulling out my hand, I showed a silver ring to Madame Xanadu. "I was wondering if there was a way you could connect me to an enchanter of some sort. Someone who can get rid of all influences in this artifact and bind it to me and me alone." Madame Xanadu narrowed her eyes and tried to reach out for it, only for me to pull back my hand. She frowned, but her expression quickly turned into a smile once I placed a roll of bills on the table. "A bit different from the services I offer, but manageable." "Follow me," Nimue said while getting up and walking deeper into the shop. My eyes trailed downwards for a split second before they came back up, enough to enjoy the view and not seem like a perv. I really need to get a girlfriend. I pushed past the beads covering the entrance to the next room and found myself standing before a black door carved with the same symbol of a crescent and a bright sun. The walls of the room were dominated with different cases showing dozens of weapons, artifacts, and paintings. There was a huge table on the left with a cauldron and different brewing items like beakers, which was the only cliché part of the room. Nimue held out her hand and I deposited the money on her palm, which she reached inside her cleavage and hid. I tried not to stare and focused on the door before us. "This will take you where you need to go," she explained. "And who am I going to meet?" I questioned, only for her to smile. "I thought you don't like spoilers." I chuckled and opened the door. "If shit goes down, I got portals." Chapter 133, Saving the Demonologist. General P.O.V. The plan had failed. And it only took a second for everything to fall apart. She could remember just barely getting started on the massive array. Delicate work that had taken weeks to construct. An array that would have spanned the whole solar system, its waypoints scattered across the other 8 planets, feeding of the mystical ley lines crisscrossing the universe. Alyssa had wondered what made her so special that she could cast such a spell without using up all her life force. But Crowley had given her no answer. Just continuously told her that she was special. Chosen. The backlash had come swift and sudden. Before Belial's realm could manifest in the real world as part of the agreement, the circle had flashed red-hot with hellfire, a cacophony of millions of voices, growling in pain, had sounded, ash-black, pale and green-clawed arms rising up through the circle. "Close it, girl!" Crowley had shouted desperately. But Alyssa couldn't do it. This was the only way to get John back. She had done everything right. Why fail now? After all this time. Yet Alyssa's hands were shaking as the growling grew larger. The energy field she had elected for the base, separating her from the harsh environment of the dwarf planet and providing her with air, had wavered dangerously as something built up through the circle on the floor. Something ominous. Something strangely familiar. Close the damn thing, Alyssa, or doom us to a fate worse than death. The stupid painting had shouted at her once again. This time she rounded up on the man in the painting, her eyes blazing with fury. "Why? What's happening? What are you not telling me? She shouted back with as much ferocity as she could. Crowley's widened when the young girl grabbed his painting and held it over the circle. No, wait, what do you think you're doing? If he had a physical body, his heart would have been hammering in fear. Why is the spell not working, Dad? Alyssa asked with as much mockery and vitriol she could induce in her tone, her mind running at lightning speeds. You don't know what you're doing. If I die. She lowered him slightly down to the grasping hands. Okay, I'll tell you. Just pull me up, he said in terror. Alyssa lowered the painting some more. Crowley could not believe her sudden viciousness. She was supposed to be loyal. His pet. But looking into her eyes, all he saw was a monster. A monster he had helped create. Okay. I lost the connection with Belial I had. That can only mean one thing: he has been taken out by a higher-ranking demon. Given that Belial is a prince of hell equal in power to the highest-ranking demons, the Hell Lords, it can only mean that Lucifer himself is responsible. Lucifer is cleaning house, Crowley told the blonde-haired magician. She widened her eyes as the implications hit her like a ton of bricks. Crowley chuckled in disdain. Yes, darling. It means your only chance to get Constantine back is no more. I wonder what you're going to do now that your foolish endeavor has failed before it even begun. Crowley's dark laugh seemed to bring Alyssa's focus back to the matter at hand. He was underestimating her. The circle was destabilizing as Belial's kingdom was going through changes in hell. Any demon who had stepped out of line had been stripped of his rank and thrown to the deepest parts of hell. That led to a massive discharge of energy as authorities were switched out and realms destroyed. Alyssa could feel that the circle was going to explode and probably take out a massive chunk of the planet, so she had to move. But first, she straightened up as her conviction strengthened, making eye contact with a smug Crowley. He thought he was unexpendable. He was wrong. If I can't get someone to bring him here, then I'll go to hell and get him back myself, Crowley. Oh, and for that part, I know I don't need you. Her luscious lips split into a menacing grin as she released the painting. Crowley's face changed. How had he never noticed this side of her? How cold he had been played for a fool so thoroughly. You will pay for this, you AARGHHH. His words were cut off as the hands teared apart the painting and proceeded to do so to the soul imprisoned within. Alyssa then teleported back to Earth, escaping the massive explosion from the pentagram. She was going to hell and bringing back Johnny's soul one way or the other, but before that, she needed power. Magical power on the level of a god if she was successfully going to do all that. Fortunately, she knew about a place where she could get it. Unfortunately, she had no idea on its location. However, there was someone who had something that could get her there. Aiden's P.O.V. The first thing I noticed about my surroundings was the dust covering inside of the crypt. I sneezed as I freshened the air around me, looking around perturbed. Was this a joke? Behind me the doorway I had used turned into yellow glowing motes and disappeared. Magic, I shook my head and pushed the stone entrance blocking my way. The stone door gave off a groaning sound before falling on the ground easily, courtesy of my super strength. Luckily, the crypt was empty, devoid of any person's remains, so I wasn't disrespecting anybody. The world on the outside, however, was completely different from what I expected. For starters, it was late evening. A look at the time told me precisely 5:23, and given the fact that it had been around 1 in New Orleans during my meeting with Nimue, give or take, it meant that Xanadu's doorway had portaled me all the way across the planet. I would have whistled in appreciation if it wasn't for what was happening before me. The crypt was located in a gated-off garden with a couple more gravestones. The garden was behind a big English manor, or at least what appeared to be the remains of one. That was the second thing different about the outside world. The building before me was burning and in wrecks. All because of a fight that was happening. Magical power undulated through my senses as equity appeared in my arms. I twirled it, turning it into its lance form as two energy signatures made themselves known to me in the middle of the mansion's wreckage. I took a running leap and cleared the garden fence, my feet digging grooves on the green grass. Then I waited as the signatures levitated out of the manor. One of them shone with a light brighter than I had ever felt from a mortal, and the other had energy the flavor of soot and sulfur hidden behind the scent of iron, horses, and, funnily enough, old books. H. I mused to myself as I noticed absent-mindedly that my energy sense was changing. The weird part was how much the former's energy signature seemed so familiar. They broke out of the building, and I finally figured out who Xanadu had sent me to. Yellow magical bindings enclosed his mouth to stop him from talking, but the long streak of white hair on his head while the rest was red made him almost instantly recognizable. Jason Blood. The other person was equally as intriguing. What's a fucking angel doing here? I wondered out loud, calling attention to myself. The girl looked to be about my age. Blue eyes, long blonde hair, a distractingly beautiful face, and a chain with an upside-down cross hanging on her wrist. The aura coming off her was distinctly angelic, just hidden behind layers of bindings. It was poetic in a way. The situation, I mean. An angel bound to a human fighting a demon also bound to a human. Still, can't let her do whatever she wanted with Jason Blood. Madame Xanadu had specifically sent me to him, which meant he was probably the only one who could help me. Hello, Mr. Blood, Madame Xanadu sent me. I'm sure she had no idea you were otherwise occupied. I spoke up, walking around their general positioning to get a clear shot. Something told me this girl was not your run-of-the-mill, mystical practitioner. She seemed oddly focused. There was little chance of getting her to do a monologue or falling into a distraction, so I had to take her out before she decided to do the same to Blood. Jason's eyes gained realization. The girl and I established eye contact as I leveled my spear at her, stopping in place. Let him go. She narrowed her eyes. Make me. But I was already moving before she could finish speaking. My inner fire changed into erratic, electric energy running down my body and shrouding me as I exploded forth. The spear was aimed for her head with the flat side positioned to land a debilitating blow to her temple. Equity cut through the air in a hiss and smacked on a yellow shield that appeared out of nowhere. The girl gasped in shock as cracks ran along the shield. Yahweh Troplet, she chanted, her voice gaining a hollow tone. Oh no, you fucking don't. The shield broke apart and Equity lengthened, spearing through the lapels of her dress. I felt a certain energy grip my whole being, trying to spatially displace me. My energy sense in a weird moment of eureka saturated the surroundings, and I used every ounce of my will to pull back on the influence. I failed. We disappeared, but appeared only a few hundred meters away in the woods. Pain gripped my body from the forced hijacking of the teleportation spell. I uncontrollably carved a trail through the tree branches, groaning in pain. A fast-moving spell cut through the air towards my position, so I clumsily bounced out of the way of the yellow bolt of energy. The trunk of the tree the spell landed on exploded with shards of wood. Who are you? The girl screamed. Now that I mention it, she had a nice voice, and the English accent was a sweet bonus. I should be the one asking that. What the fuck is an angel doing running around on Earth? I shouted back and saw her look at me in confusion. Angel. She shook her head. Her hand still gripping Blood by the throat. No matter, I already have what I need. I jumped at her once again. This time a gyrating ball of fire in my palm, only for her to throw Blood towards me and disappear in a flash. I caught the demonologist, dismissing the fireball, and landed on the ground. The binding on his mouth disappeared, and he stood up urgently and started to run towards the destroyed manor. I followed him without a word, created a bubble shield around us, and flew us quickly back to manor grounds. Hey, can you tell me what the fuck is going on? I inquired, stretching a little. My body still felt sore from what I had done. Blood ignored me, only chanting, "Where is it? Where is it? What are you looking for? What did she take? Maybe I can help you. Hey, hey! Excuse me." I gripped his shoulder hard and turned him to face me, only for a fist to dig into my palm, intercepted before it could land on my face. Blood tried to pull back his hand and I could feel the enhanced strength there, but in this form, he was probably only as strong as Calder. Calm down, I told him, emphasizing the words by squeezing his fists. The older man winced and nodded. I let him go and he sat on a piece of stone rubble. A pang of sadness hit me for what he'd lost. In the comics this dude was always alone and now his manor had been destroyed, along with everything delicate inside as well. Maybe this is what will make him move to Gotham? I remember in most universes that's where he stays. I sat on a broken section of a pillar and we both watched the sunset in silence. A few minutes later, a deep voice began to speak. Serial, a fallen angel bound by a cult-worshipping Naren to a human girl meant for sacrifice. One that a friend of mine, against my better judgment, decided to take in. And now, 10 years later, 10 years after John passed away, she's determined to bring him back. He chuckled. I don't even know why I was fighting to stop her, Lord knows I miss the bastard. Wait, you mean Constantine? John Constantine? I questioned him. Blood looked at me and smiled sadly. Who else would remain a pain in my ass long after he's dead? Chapter 134, Patriotic Earthling. General P.O.V. Cameras went off as the Secretary General of the UN cleared his throat. He looked down at the gathered press, himself flanked by multiple world leaders. I would like to formally thank all of you for joining us today, he stated, his heavily accented English blaring out of the speaker. He had a rough voice. The world we live in is, contrary to popular belief, not in our conscious control. It is our home, the cradle of humanity. However, that does not explicitly mean we have all the answers, or we have solved any of the numerous mysteries and real-life anomalies that happen worldwide on a daily basis. We have all heard the news about Pluto's demise. I am here to address that issue. For starters, NASA has reported on the destruction of the dwarf planet, and this has been confirmed by specialists across the globe. Secretary General Zhang Dangdun looked up from his speech to let that sink in. It is sad and terrifying. The fact that something so impactful can happen within the solar system, our very own backyard, and we come to learn it 5 hours later. However, Earth as a whole, despite race, background, or inclination, is an enduring planet. We should use this chance to re-evaluate a lot of the systems in place, to unify more. Use this cost as a guiding light to move forward in one stride. This especially rings true for nations with civil unrest like Bialia's continued efforts to merge with Curek based on questionable historical records. Join us and usher in a new dawn. The UN is further aiming to open up more avenues of cooperation between the Earth and our sister planet Mars by way of an Earth-Mars communication satellite in the case of another planetary ending event. General Zhang looked into the cameras without flinching. For long, we have battled against racial and cultural diversity, extreme nationalism, gender inequality, metahuman and alien relations, and sexuality. Through all this, it can be inferred that humanity as a whole is a very complex, petty, highly emotional, and opinionated race. We need to change that if we hope to survive what this new world is slowly turning into. We need to adapt, something we were very good at in the past, and emerge stronger as one unified whole to combat these new threats. The screen changed to a logo of the Galaxy Broadcasting System, abbreviated to GBS. The camera panned out to reveal the pundit and a guest seated on two sides of a small table, facing each other. The host of the show was none other than G. Gordon Godfrey, someone known for defaming his guests and critical outlook when discussing sensitive issues. This unfortunately made him very popular despite the man's venomous tongue. G. Gordon Godfrey took a long, loud, and distracting sip of his cup of coffee before placing the mug on the table between him and Lex Luthor. The latter sat comfortably on his seat with an amiable smile on his face. For those who knew him, however, they would see a sharp glint in his eyes that spoke volumes about his patience. No one has come out to openly take credit for the destruction of Pluto. Gordon Godfrey said as a way to start the conversation. He had already introduced Luthor to the audience. Not that Luthor needed any introduction, seeing as he was one of, if not the richest man in the world. His only true competition being the mammoth that was Wayne Enterprises. That is true. The authorities are still carrying out their investigations on who might have been responsible. Luthor answered smoothly. His voice was clear and loud enough. Of course, of course. And, would I be right to assume that the interplanetary space probe that captured the dastardly images of the dwarf planet's twilight hours, aptly named Vista 002, was manufactured by LexCorp through a government contract? Gordon questioned innocently. Yes. Luthor answered after a brief second of hesitation. A wide smile spread out across Gordon's face. Well, that is interesting, Mr. Luthor. Very interesting indeed, the host stated while giving Luthor a suspicious look. The man in question frowned. I believe I don't follow. What are you trying to say, Gordon? Lex knew he had fallen into Gordon's trap. The Apocalyptian new god was not playing by the script. However, Luthor was an old hand at this. So he remained calm, despite Gordon Godfrey's intention to ruin his reputation. Me? I'm not trying to say anything. The facts speak for themselves, Mr. Luthor. The host sneered. How many times has LexCorp products, I'm talking top-of-the-line technology, weapons from government contracts and devices meant to help been used for nefarious ends? Superman has gone up against suits of armors, Kryptonian-infused rifles, energy guns, power-draining devices and other peculiar equipment with strange effects. Do you know what all these things have in common? Gordon Godfrey directed the question to the audience. They all had a LexCorp logo. Gordon Godfrey declared in mock surprise, as if he couldn't believe his own words. Then he turned to Luthor, who was still silently observing, trying to work out the new god's intentions. The man was a wild card, but Lex knew that everyone had a tell. And now, putting two and two together, one might start to wonder, with the recent destruction of Pluto, if LexCorp, the creator of the probe that captured the incident, is as totally blameless as they appear to be. It's only so many wrecked buildings, destroyed houses and lost lives that the someone stole our equipment and used it for bad motives excuse can explain away. The destruction of a whole planet, however, well, that is a different cake altogether. Gordon Godfrey's grin was positively saccharine at this point. He was enjoying it. And Lex was now understanding why the man had it out for him. You see, Lex, can I call you Lex? Anyway, Lex, you can hide the truth under the corporate umbrella all you want, but sooner or later, like a sapling, it finds a way to move towards the light. And with that, Lex understood what point the new god was trying to drive home. He thought that the light had somehow destroyed the planet without informing Gordon, who was in a way, Darkseid's liaison to the Earth. And that had led to the delicate issue that would make any more machinations against the Earth by Apocalypse even harder. The Earth to Mars cooperation. Gordon Godfrey was not thrilled about the Earth's newfound spirit for unity. A unified world made it hard to divide and conquer. A unified world allowed for choices to be made on a significant and necessary basis rather than a power-hungry or greedy one. Luthor's quick thinking allowed him to weigh the pros and cons of the two roads he had been presented with. He could take the road of cooperation, stoking the hearts of people by denying anything and instead laying blame on an unseen and unknown enemy, then supporting Secretary General Zhang and the UN's newfound backbone and logical thinking on cooperation between Earth and Mars. The alternative was he could take Gordon Godfrey's extended olive branch and use the same excuse, the same pike, to drive humanity apart. He was one of the most influential men on the planet. Simply calling to attention that aliens, Martians to be precise, might have been responsible would stop the potential marshalling. Humanity would fall back to the mindset of us versus them that the Justice League had been trying to combat by their efforts. This would further snowball into a real issue given the fact that Batman, one of the two normal human superheroes, had resigned from the group. Luthor was at a crossroads. One option would potentially see a united Earth, better relations with Mars but at the expense of the Light's alliance with Darkseid, and the other would see a splintered Earth and a magnified racist mentality towards anything perceived as different but a stronger alliance with Apocalypse. Lex didn't need to wonder what Vandal would have chosen. Given his pretty strong ties with Apocalypse, it was very obvious. So, Luthor smiled back at G. Gordon Godfrey. Well, G. Gordon, your observant take and particularly apathetic understanding on the socio-political predicaments facing the Earth has always been refreshing. I like someone who's blunt. Someone who is not afraid to speak up and challenge the norms. So I will pay you the same courtesy and be as blunt as possible. Lex told the well-groomed man who had a small smirk on his face. By all means, Mr. Luthor. Speak freely. G. Gordon Godfrey stated, giving Lex the field. The bald-headed man interlocked his fingers together and his easy smile turned sharp. One might call your statements distinctly anti-Earth, G. Gordon. G. Gordon's smirk slid off his face. However, Lex wasn't done. This is a critical juncture in humanity's history. A point in time where one small tilt in the balancing scale can take us backwards by many steps or spring us forward and usher in a true bastion and hope for future generations. Instead of focusing on that, however, I find it suspect on how you're determined to defame LexCorp, knowing fully well that that would sour relations with NASA and by extension the government as well. My intentions were to call to question LexCorp's top brass, Lex. Not to personally offend you. The public needs answers, and I am an agent of truth. G. Gordon shot back, and Lex knew he had him. However, he couldn't destroy him too thoroughly, G. Gordon, and in addition, Apocalypse still had their uses. And that is why humanity will forever stagnate with your kind of thinking. It's not about offending me, G. Gordon. It's about your priorities. You sit there and focus on what has already happened instead of inquiring on the way forward. The perpetrators responsible for the destruction of Pluto might never be found. Does that mean you will forever be stuck in the past? I have done things I am not proud of, but right here and now, especially after General Zhang Dangan's speech, I find myself in a position of power. The power of having a voice. Lex looked at the camera directly. I know there is fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of those different from ourselves, but I urge you to remain open-minded and know, you do not face that fear alone. Whatever come may, humanity will prevail and come out stronger at the end of it. So give it a chance. Give unity a chance. I support the UN's future efforts in the Earth-Mars communication satellite. And from now on, I am not just a full-blooded American, I am a patriotic Earthling. And sooner or later, Luthor would be at the head of it all. That's the end of this tale for now. Thank you for watching. The author hasn't updated the story in quite a while, so I'll be assuming it's abandoned, meaning this is where it ends until I finish the story myself later on. Whenever that is? For now, I have no clue. I'm currently writing my own fanfictions, which you can check out in the description, and in the meanwhile you can check out a few of my other fanfictions on the channel right here. So until then, peace.